The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
Our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
Exopolitics, paranormal phenomena, and deep analysis of current world events. From somewhere in the desert, between Area 51 and Roswell, blasting across the planet, the Manticore Network proudly presents Veritas, because the truth will set you free.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
It was too fast to be an airplane.
I think it's time to open the books on the question of government investigations of UFOs. We ought to do it really because it's right. We ought to do it because the American people, quite frankly, can handle the truth. And we ought to do it because it's the law.
Be skeptical. Do be as skeptical as you want, but by all, don't close your mind.
Greetings to everyone around the world, and a warm welcome to a special edition of the Veritas Show, where we bring you disclosure, one guest at a time. I'm your host, Mel Fabregas, and I sincerely thank you for joining me once again. And if this is your first time, make yourself at home. As usual, I want to thank all our members. You are keeping Veritas alive. And although our 1-year anniversary happened a few days ago, on December the 5th, tonight is when we celebrate it. I wanted to bring one of our favorite guests back, and since the latest Alta report just came out, he accepted another invitation. Clif High is now officially a fixture of the Veritas Show. Clif will be with us shortly. And in addition to tonight's explosive interview with Clif High, I'm also adding another interview this week, a bonus of my exclusive interview with Zachariah Sitchin. This interview will only be available to members, so I hope you join tonight and start the new year with Veritas. I have to tell you, I'm extremely honored, privileged, and humbled by the fact that you are here listening after 1 year on the cyberwaves. What was supposed to be an improvised telephone call that I wanted to keep as a souvenir turned out to be something more serious than I ever expected. The first show, the first month, the first 6 months with Alfred Weber, but 1 year really means so much to me. Although I'm not receiving any awards, I must act as if I'm the recipient of one. You see, without you, Veritas would have died a long time ago. I want to thank all of you who have contributed from the beginning with your assistance with research, feedback, questions, recommendations, making videos on YouTube to help us spread the word. There are too many people to thank. Then you'll remember, after 6 months I could not do the show the way it was done before, and I had to consider canceling the show for lack of resources or adopting a subscription model in order to make the show be self-sufficient. I'm happy to report that there are new members joining on a daily basis. And when I say that I'm not the recipient of any awards, that's not entirely true. Every time a new member joins, to me, that is one award you are giving me. It is a vote an award of confidence. Also, I want to thank all our guests who have been with us this year and for taking a chance on this unknown show, especially Dr. Milton Torres, who believed Veritas was an established show. I have learned something from every guest, and to be quite honest, 2009 was training and a learning curve for me. 2010 is when Veritas will be truly flourishing, and as long as you continue to support me and spreading the word, Veritas will go on. We'll continue exploring every corner of the world to bring the knowledge that has been so difficult to obtain through traditional channels. Take next week's show, for example. I'm introducing a mystery guest and have no doubt that you will truly enjoy all of what that show will cover. Many people ask me, what's next for Veritas? The answer is, I don't know. Just like I don't know what would happen after the Milton Torres telephone call. I simply posted it somewhere and people reacted to it. I don't know what the future will bring. With every week's new show, it is a new adventure, and that's my focus. I'm enjoying this journey and learning with all of you as we go along. The truth, in my opinion, is not a destination, but a journey full of twists and turns. And my hope is that with every show, we'll discover something new. One of our loyal listeners, my dear friend Jeff from the United Kingdom, really illustrates this well, and I'd like to share the following with you. Quote, "Hi Mel, thinking about the Veritas anniversary, I thought it would be interesting and fun to list just some of the issues that interest me the most and compare my viewpoint before and after Veritas. Mel, please note sometimes it's not always the show directly that changes my mind. Often, it's the research your show triggers me to do, which is even better. 9/11 conspiracy. Before Veritas, completely unconvinced. What utter rubbish. After Veritas, mind has been blown wide open on this one, trying to stop brain from falling out. Moon landing. Did we go to the moon? Before, yes. After, absolutely still yes. Alien structures on the moon. Before, emphatic no. After, actually maybe. Alien abductions. Before, no. After, yes, but still completely unconvinced by all hypnotic regression recollection. Are we being visited by ETs? Before, yes. After, absolutely bloody yes. Roswell UFO crash. Before, yes. After, yes. Reinforced thanks to Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Philip Corso, real deal? Before, had never heard of him. After, despite Stan Friedman's protestations, I think there is some truth there. Same also for Billy Meyer and Bob Lazar. I think these three demonstrate that the Disinfo programs really do exist. Disclosure pending. Before, no. After, there does seem to be activity, but perhaps the people up top know less than we think. New World Order. Before, firm no. After, my rock-solid original opinion has all but disintegrated. You've turned my little world upside down, Mr. Fabregas, and I'm not best pleased. Population reduction conspiracy. Before, no. After, I think they will do whatever they think they must do. 2012 Mayan prophecy. Before, never heard of it. After, now I've heard of it. Will come in further on the 22nd of December 2012. Hopefully. False flag. Before, never heard of the concept. After, thank you Veritas, I'm now on red alert. The Virginia Brazilian Roswell. Before, intrigued. After, cannot answer. Young Mr. Fabregas must try even harder to deliver on this project, laughing out loud. You see, Jeff is a fan of AJ Gevard from Brazil. I have tried a few times to get in touch with AJ to no avail, so if anyone can make contact, this is an invitation. And the last one, HARP. Before Veritas, knew absolutely nothing about it. After Veritas, research commenced with opinion pending. That really is what Veritas is all about for me. Thanks Mel and thanks Veritas. Loyalty guaranteed, my dear friend. Jeff, unquote. I think this is great, and I hope we can have more of these exercises right on the forum. I've opened a thread, the before and after for Veritas. I'd like to hear from you. And don't forget about giving the gift of truth. Truth certificates are available for 3, 6 months, and 1 year. Are you still thinking on what to give? Do you want to give something that won't be put away forever? Give something that may change someone's life. Also, I want to thank those of you who continue donating subscriptions. I will also continue doing my part and will donate one for every one you donate. Together, we can make a difference for the less fortunate. You can also transcribe shows, and that will really help me out, and you'll get a free subscription as well. Visit the free subscription link of the Veritas website, veritasshow.com. Oh, and those of you who have asked for t-shirts, mugs, caps, bumper stickers, and more, you got it. I will be adding more items regularly. Just go to the Veritas store link on our website and place your order there. I'm sure EXO will be very happy for you to display him wherever you go. And this will also be very useful to those of you who go to the many different conferences around the world. I remember at Dr. Stephen Greer's CSETI conference, since people hear me on the show but don't know how I look like. They didn't know until I was wearing my Veritas shirt on the second day, and that's when people started approaching me and saying hello. That was a great experience. Take a picture of yourself with your shirt or your sticker or your cap or what have you. I will open a Veritas gallery soon so you can share them with us. And now, get ready for another roller coaster ride with Clif High. Learn how to navigate the sea of uncertainty that may be approaching. If you want to stay in the matrix, turn on your TV. If you want to learn the art of threat management and be awake and aware, don't go anywhere. This is Mel Fabregas, and you're listening to the Veritas Show.
This is Catherine Austin Fitz, and you're listening to The Veritas Show.
Clif High and George Ure, two self-described time monks, shared dire predictions based on their webbot technology. Their method captures changes in language patterns within internet discussions. This aggregated data is then processed with software to determine various keywords, which they interpret in a predictive fashion. For the coming months, the two recommend developing self-sufficiency and the ability to live off the grid. The webbot project, developed in the late 1990s, was created to assist in making stock market predictions. The technology uses a system of spiders to crawl the internet and search for keywords, much like a search engine does. When a keyword is located, the bot program takes a snapshot of the text preceding and following the keyword. The snapshot of text is sent to a central location, where it is then filtered to define meaning. The project's concept is aimed at tapping into the collective unconscious of the universe and its inhabitants. As well, there's an interesting time concept involved and an unusual concept of a tipping point regarding the past, current, and future times. In 2001, the bot operators began to notice that stock market predictions were not the only matters being accurately predicted by the program, and they began to take notice of the coincidence with occurrences and explored it further. One of the first accurate predictions from the bot program took place in June of 2001. At that time, the program predicted that a life-altering event would take place within the next 60 to 90 days, an occurrence of such proportion that its effect would be felt worldwide. The program based its prediction on its filtered web chatter content, which ultimately represents the collective unconscious of society. Regrettably, the program's prediction proved accurate and the Twin Towers fell on September the 11th, 2001. And this is where it starts to become really interesting. The bot program also predicts a worldwide calamity taking place in the year 2012. With us tonight, he is back, one of the creators of the WebBot project, Clif High. Hello again, Clif, and welcome to the Veritas Show. Clif High one more time. How are you?
Doing fine. Thank you very much for inviting me again.
My pleasure, as usual.
This is actually far better sound quality than I'm getting off of my phone, though, because of the constant interruptions from whoever the hell is tapping it.
You also get that?
Oh, yeah, it's constant. Yeah.
We got disconnected 24 times with Dr. Paul Laviolette a few weeks ago. So
I heard that. It was just amazing. Yes.
I know.
And then can you send me your snail mail address via email?
Okay.
Okay. In the future, we're thinking we may ship out DVDs and stuff if communications require that method. The internet may be unreliable later.
Oh, my. Is that a sign of things to come?
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, wow. By the way, who's Igor?
This is an individual that I used to work with in another capacity when we were both employees.
Okay.
He's a highly trained ex-military network supervisor.
Okay.
And he's also worked repeatedly in the phone companies, as I have. So we share something of a common background, and he does the hardware stuff. He has really no interest in software, although he loves to do scripting. And in my sense, he's sort of a poor guy caught between the generation I'm in as a pioneer in the software and the script kiddies that are behind us in the Gen X.
The reason why I ask you, somebody has a question, and he says, and I'm going to ask you all of it right now, but he says, when are you going to release Igor back to the wild? So I didn't know what he meant.
It's really funny.
Okay.
Igor runs my servers. I used to run them myself, but it became a real pain to do to baby all this old equipment. We were always constantly buying, 4-year-old hard drives and this sort of thing to keep going and build our RAID array. So, but yeah, poor Igor is now actually out in the wild, east of the mountains, out scouting caves at elevation and living the good life on a 31-acre farm.
Oh, great. Clif, this is the 1-year anniversary of the Veritas Show, and people have very high expectations. But the last show we did together was really great, and we have great questions from people all over the world for you.
Well, let's dive into them then.
Well, I frequently get email from people saying, at least once a week, when are you having Clif back? Again and again.
Oh, you poor fellow.
And as soon as I tell them, as soon as the next Alta report comes back, we can do it. And so here we are, new Alta report right off the press. And I have to tell you the truth. Things really are not good. We know that. But something inside of me wants to ask you, can we find a glimmer of hope by the end of this show? Do you think that's possible?
I certainly do, especially because it's we need to differentiate between fear management and threat management. And once we get to the point where we can accept the fact that we are fear-ridden and sort of like eat our fears, then we can concretely and adultly deal with the threats that cause those fears. And that's no big deal.
And before we start, and before I ask you what's new and a summary of the latest Alta, which, by the way, I want to dissect. A lot of the questions will be dissecting the latest report. You and I had a conversation a few days ago about Gary McKinnon, the alleged hacker. And I say alleged because...
Yeah, no. Actually, let me say definitively, he did not hack. And he didn't crack, and these have very specific definitions in the software world.
Yes.
What he did was find an open door and walk through it. And the shame in this lies on those individuals that were so careless as to use image progression network software installation with stupidly with no passwords, no security. It's not McKinnon, it's the Air Force.
And I think that's the most embarrassing part, to admit that he didn't even have to crack the code to get it. He basically found an IP or an URL, just went in and got the information that he wanted.
Yeah. And it was absurd. I mean, they quite literally left it open for system-level privileges for just supplying a password of the word password, or in many cases, nothing at all.
And by the way, I tried to get in touch with his mother, and I did, just to have him on the show and have him talk more a few months ago. But basically, I think that they were expecting some leniency, and that's why they kept a low profile. But as you know, the extradition process is in motion. I heard you are also doing something for Gary, and you gave me the green light the other day to present it to my audience. but I thought it would be more appropriate if you did. So tell us, what are you doing to help Gary?
Well, I'm trying to do sort of a back channel assistance for the fellow. And basically what I've done is I've offered a free copy of the report to any member of law enforcement, serving law enforcement or serving military in the United States or out of it. It doesn't matter really, NATO, anybody. And all you have to do is send me an email with Gary McKinnon in either the subject or the body of the text, noting that, of course, as it passes through echelon, it'll start racking up different hits in their internal who's talking to who networking scanning software. And so I intend to shift the balance of power, so to speak, because right now they feel that, it is inevitable. They have set process in motion where Gary McKinnon faces the fierce jaws of the beast, and the beast thinks it's running downhill towards poor Gary. And what I propose to do is to start throwing small stones, and eventually lots of small stones in its way, as these interlinks start building up, and they start finding out how many people within their own military are on the side of Gary McKinnon. It'll also start skewing their statistics relative to what they think they're learning from his name being bandied about. So in essence, a lot of people have inadvertently, this is a secondary issue here, a lot of people in the woo-woo, what I call the woo-woo community, have inadvertently exposed themselves to identification through this networking software because they've been discussing Gary McKinnon in emails and on the and online. And as a result of which, they very easily were mapped out. I was able to do it with no trouble at all with my spiders. I could tell you who's talking to who and build a virtual network of all of these people. And so what I decided to do when I realized what was actually available in the sense of that view was to muddy the water, so to speak, and provide a masking layer that would make such information useless to the powers that be. Make sense?
Yes, it does. And hopefully we're going to have some people, military, law enforcement, listen to this. And can this really make a difference, you think?
It certainly can. We already have. We're already starting to rack up cross connections. And basically what happens is every time one of these emails goes through the email system, it goes to a router and eventually ends up in Echelon's hands. And then the software dissects it and says who sent it to whom and what was the subject and the body. And it looks for all these key words, perhaps several million for all I know. It's done at a supercomputer level, and they just plow through the text like anybody could. Actually, it'd be fun, cool software to write. But then they make up links and they start saying, well, so-and-so's got, this guy is actually a hub of a network in the sense that he's talking to these people and these people and these people about these subjects that we find sensitive. And so it starts providing a layer of information about these interconnects. And what I intend to do, and have already accomplished, is by forming a different group of people that are discussing it that they will not be able to discreetly remove because of the conditions that I've put on this whole arrangement. They're I'm in essence going to balloon out the woo-woo universe for them by hopefully several orders of magnitude. In which case they would be looking, in essence what I'm going to do is to provide the haystack around the needle.
Oh, I see. So what is it? What do you expect? What is the end result of this project, if you will?
That, at two levels. At the more base level, I expect that they will not be able to provide pinpoint harassment on people in the woo-woo community who had previously discussed Gary McKinnon in an honest and open and in sort of an innocent way, right? Trying to help him or whatever. And then the secondary issue is that it will make the whole Gary McKinnon issue much larger relative to the amount of traffic that's flowing through Echelon. And that's how a lot of these people are making decisions, because they have other software, for instance, that guides the people who actually go and sift through the data and the data mining. And they have this software that does it on a fuzzy logic basis that says, actually in a similar sense to some of our software. And this software gets all excited when it runs across a bunch of the same kind of words passing through in an unexpected fashion. It's looking for shifts in language on a real-time basis in a supercomputer, whereas we do it on a static basis. In any event, it would suddenly see that there's a lot more chatter about Gary McKinnon. That'll rise up to somebody's report. It'll eventually go all the way up to where decisions are made at the level, say, several layers down from the president. And within those decision levels, they'll just see that, well, hey, used to be that we had 19% of the woo-woo community discussing Gary McKinnon. Now all of a sudden it's 85%, and it's crept over 15% into the mainstream. What's going on? And do we need to be careful here? Because bear in mind, all these people work under the cover your ass principle for most of their motivation. And at some point, they'll find that when official requests are made about the status of the Gary McKinnon case, they will find a much larger set of awareness about it than they had anticipated, which I hope will tip the decision-making in Gary McKinnon's favor.
And one last thing about Gary, and then we'll start dissecting the latest Ulta. I always think that if he is finally extradited to the United States and put on trial, wouldn't the defense ask for him to talk about what he saw? And then the United States may say, no, you didn't. That does not exist. Because if they admit what he saw, wouldn't there be an admission of extraterrestrial life or perhaps technology and black projects and a secret space program?
Yes, exactly. Basically, they are caught between Gary and a really rough spot because in order to prosecute him, they effectively, realistically, they would have to bring out stuff that they know. However, I don't expect it to go that way. There's no real reason that they need prosecute him out in the open in any way, shape, or form. Their issue is to whether or not, the issue they have to establish is whether or not they've been harmed. If they can't cross that barrier, then they do have some legal issues relative to a defense that could be mounted to get him out if they can't actually prove a state of damage. So that's another issue. Ed Grimsley is out there with his night vision goggles, checking out all of the stuff flying around, and basically is attempting to make, as part of the public record, the actual photos and movements of the supposed non-existent black ops fleet, or whatever we're to call it,
right.
Off-planet extraterrestrial Navy, Air Force, whatever the thing is. And I've actually got a pair of those goggles, and I've seen some of the activity that he has reported with my own eyes. I just don't have the ability at this point to put it on video. The goggles don't lend themselves easily to cross-connecting to cameras and stuff. So you have to do a little bit of manufacturing, which I will do when I have the time here. But in any event, plus I don't have the opportunity in the weather being sucked in. But in any event, if there's enough of this information put out into the public record, then prosecuting Gary again becomes kind of a moot sort of a deal. And yet they don't ever have to admit anything, so to speak. I actually do not expect that would ever arise, that they would structure it that way. Usually you'll find, I've worked for government and been involved with government in many different fashions, and usually you'll find that their best approach from their viewpoint is to skirt the large issues and come at them with a very small technicality that they can prove beyond a reasonable shadow that no one really cares about in a meaningful sense, but it allows them to get you in front of a judicial panel that can then make a decision in their favor, and in that sense, the prosecution is rigged. So in other words, they may have him on some technicality like an illegal use of a router or other government property where they claim that he has damaged them by, restricting the traffic flow by 12 packets a second or something. Was doing his snooping. And then he'll pretty much have to admit that, and that's as far as they go. They don't bother to prosecute, and then they say, okay, 12 years in jail or death, whichever comes first, that kind of thing. And I've seen government work at that level, so, but also at that level, they're very, again, as I say, cover your ass motivated. So they will be careful, especially with someone whose profile is starting to rise, and we can hope exponentially.
So let's help out, folks, to make Gary McKinnon's profile go even higher. So Echelon, if you're listening, we're going after you too.
What do you mean if?
It's when, right?
Yeah. And no, it's continuous. It's not even when anymore. They are listening.
Right. I recently heard, and speaking of things above our heads, I recently heard your response to the question of what the spiral of Norway really was on the Jeff Rense program. Any further updates, and have you found anything within the Alta report that may be linked to this event. And one person says, seems like a perfect, quote-unquote, space goat fart, and the pun is truly intended here.
Yes, indeed. And if we were to have it in the report, that's certainly where it would be. We don't have anything that I could specifically say that, forecast this particular space goat fart. But boy, it sure was one. I mean, anything that actually the space goat fart entity and the whole construct there was guided a lot by almost an addiction to screwy British comedies in the science fiction realm, such as Red Dwarf, where they curiously had one of their characters who was descended from a cat who could sniff out strange things in space, and he used to run around a lot saying, "Swirly thing alert, swirly thing alert." And in that case, I think we need to also be saying swirly thing alert here. The Russian podcasts that are out there seem to suggest that a lot of them, the information is being withheld, but it's more than just the manifestation that we saw. In other words, there are some reports that areas around the path from the swirly thing back over towards Russia have had some level of damage to plants that's unexpected. So it does seem to indicate that this indeed was a projection as opposed to any form of a missile with holes in the side or whatever. Also, there's a layer of discreteness that's now visible in some of the infrared photos that are coming out that suggest a weird form of a I would have to say a magnetic vessel. It actually suggests that there are these discrete swirling arms in there, and that what's interesting is the space between the arms maintains a ratio and a presence that seems to indicate that it is an alternating magnetic banding, if you will, that is creating this effect. And then further, there are the rumors or the claims or the puffery. I don't know how to really interpret it at this stage. That from Russian podcasts that suggest that the swirly thing is a nice technical effect, but not really the point, and that the whole point of it was the, if you will, the dead black center of the swirly thing as it matured, and that was the whole point of the demonstration, because the idea is that you could use that was actually a point of destruction where the magnetic energies were, if you will, shredding the ether or stopping the continuous creation of universe for a brief period of time. And so if you could, for instance, if someone shot a missile at you, you could aim the swirly thing at them and get this little black hole, so to speak. It's not a hole, but a void. And when the missile hit the void, it would simply disintegrate. Probably wouldn't even leave any rubble. So that's the claim, anyway, coming out of the podcasts. Some of the podcast guys claim to be relatively connected into their version of the Black Ops. So, again, I don't know how to evaluate it, but it is a point of interest.
I don't know if you felt as stupid as I did when they said that it was a missile. Is it missile, or could it be HARP from Norway?
I don't see it as being a material. No, it is certainly an energetic projection, so a HARP kind of a thing. Yeah.
Right. Last year, you had linguistics, which predicted, quote-unquote, disappearances of people, elites, or minions of the elite. You described them in such a way that would be quite strange events. So far in 2009, nothing as such has occurred. Do you foresee this to be pushed further into the future, or is it something that it just off the radar?
Well, no, there's actually two issues here. I may have been wrong on the visibility of it, but we have certain indications that we weren't wrong in the event. So in other words, there indeed has been a level of disappearances that are being, I don't want to say covered, well, they are. They're being covered up by other explanations, and some of the other manifestations are actually showing up relative to that. So I was probably wrong 100% on the visibility aspect of it, and we'll probably see the disappearance word itself come up at a much higher level in the future. But the actual structure of things, where we said disappearances will cause anxiety within the powers that be, which will cause the following effects in terms of enlargement of bodyguard units, and all of the other effects that are forecast, we're seeing the other effects forecast. And we have noted a number of prominent individuals that have died under mysterious circumstances or have suicided or something along these lines. Now, some of these are probably quite legit deaths. some of those that we've been informed of that have a very high profile, I've gotten emails from people that said, hey, this don't believe this. This particular headline is not true. I was there, and here are the issues. And most of those emails I just store away. I mean, there's no point really getting into the details. If I'm correct, we'll see that the actual disappearance word come out in a higher level of visibility as we move into 2010. And some of this stuff does shift. I mean, we do get a forward build on that, but we still have, the last time we did the run, we still have the disappearance subset still ticking along. So it's much more likely one of those progressing themes. Again, the visibility is an issue. In a controlled media, it's awful hard to decide what is accurate and what isn't. But we do have people, for instance, in Europe that have noticed a very large increase in the cadres of bodyguards around prominent individuals all over the place that is disproportionate to the economic times.
Maybe Berlusconi needed a few more bodyguards the other day in Italy.
He needed at least one good one.
Yeah. In your September report, you had documented Andrew Bashago as one of the official whistleblowers that the Alta...
No. As meeting the requirement. I mean, I'm not anointing him or anything. I'm just saying that the words he's expressing have met a certain level of the forecast language that we had. I want to be real clear about that. Okay. I'm not trying to say that this guy is legit. Everybody presents their information and they stand on their own. The fact that his presentation of his visual image when taken to a university that had a very high level of resolution computer screen validates his paper sure goes a long way towards saying this fellow's a stand-up guy.
I'm still listening to the interview that he and I did, and I just love what he had to say. At the same time, do you think he's telling the truth? Do you foresee him as, and his material, becoming a major staple in the years to come?
There's two separate issues there. There's what we have in the data, and then there's my personal opinion. What we have in the data suggests that his presentation of life on Mars is indeed a staple and will just grow and grow and grow at a fairly steady rate. Then you're asking whether or not I think he's legitimate in his statements and other claims. I have no way of validating any of his other statements about the government, about going to Mars, or any of this other stuff.
Teleportation.
Correct. There's nothing in what he says that is incongruous when a particular level of analysis is done. So we do this level of analysis called SCED. I'm having to apologize here. We're getting another hit from the Pineapple Express. But we do this analysis called SCED. Subject knowledge elucidates the domain. It's a training you get when you get into debating and that kind of thing, if you're at a very good debating school. You learn to analyze language and what people are saying within the context of the domain and see whether they step out of the domain with the language. We've found no instance of that with his testimony of his past. In other words, his statements and the detail that he has are all congruous with the overall themes and are congruous with the times in which he stated that they existed, and none of the language that he's using now to describe those times past is in any way reliant on today's knowledge. So I would have to say on a personal level, I'm not doubting him. I'm not believing him because I never believe anything. As an educated person, I will hold up an idea, model it, without having to accept it. And that's where I'm at. I'm modeling his information. I find nothing incongruous with it, and I haven't accepted it as part of my model of universe, but I haven't rejected it either. Most other whistleblowers that we run across that say, well, I've scooted to Mars, or, I saved the planet from another timeline, or any of this kind of stuff, you can take that in your model and kick it out pretty damn quick. The issue with Andrew here is the congruity of the language, the way the whole thing fits, and the physical information he's presented in his paper. I find that quite compelling. If you ever have a chance to look at those photos in a very high-level resolution monitor, you will be quite shocked.
One of the common tactics of the powers that be is to, quote-unquote, hide hints of knowledge of controversial or conspiratorial project or data in plain sight. In fact, not only has this been done in the past, it can be argued that the mainstream placement of such esoteric or taboo subjects has ramped up exponentially over the years, especially with the ubiquitous nature of television and internet today. It seems like they've stopped fighting the tide, but now use it to their advantage. How has the massive diversification and specification of television shows and websites since 1997 affected how humans' data mining techniques? Do you have to rewrite your algorithms when, for example, Disney produces 4 movies in 2 years, having mostly to do with space, ETs, and time travel?
We don't rewrite the algorithms, but I constantly have to tune the lexicon. So, for instance, I have to go on in and write a filter that screens out all of the descriptive language that was used for the movie 2012. I have to do it for all kinds of movies, and this is why it's such a royal pain and so much work, is because in that sense, yes, I have to stay abreast of the current popular culture in my screening process so that I don't have my data skewed by what's coming out from Hollywood.
Right. That's exactly why this question was asked. Many of your subsets focus on terms that have a negative emotional impact. And you've explained in the past why you do this, because of the shock factor, the discussions that surround emotional topics, the newsworthy nature of negative events, etc. Granted,
correct.
All events are for the most part linked. A listener of yours might imagine that you may not want to only talk about the negative things that you have significant probabilistic outcomes. Can you comment on the positive subsets? Maybe one of you have a significant amount of confidence regarding events that are to unfold in the near future.
Yeah, there are positive subsets that provide us with the potential for a very cool planet Earth here post-2013. Most of the positive subsets are coming from the space goat farts entity and are related to the new electrics. So in one way, hang on a second here. In one way, the positive future could be seen as post-2012. We all get through it and we say, whew. And at the same time, there's been enough chaos that there is a release of hidden technology from the black ops kind of guys, and that's what pumps up the new electrics. Or it could be that there is a science fiction story effect going on here, where because so many people believe that we've been successful with the new electrics already in the shadow ops world, and that all they are doing is duplicating that they rush on out and do just that, duplicate, and thus release the stuff in an independent stream. We frequently see this occur in universe where it's really not an issue of ownership of ideas. I don't think there's any real concept in the sense of ownership of new and original thoughts. Because of the way that humanity is constructed, you're mostly just an antenna for radiation. You stand around, a thought radiates towards you, you happen to catch it, you happen to act on it, and you become associated with it. Buckminster Fuller was also of this opinion that he used patents not to aggrandize his ego, but merely as a way of recording his ability to affect the universe around him in what he called Experiment B. And in my time, patents have taken a different turn and are just a tool for the powers that be to suppress information, so I didn't go the patent route after 1 or 2 brief experiences with it. And I've taken another way of tracking my ability to affect universe in what I call Experiment C. And I'm using the bot reports that way. Sort of makes some sense?
It does. And folks, a lot of the questions I'm reading tonight come from all of you because of the nature of this show. You had so many questions. And a lot of people who are submitting questions are very scientifically oriented. So sometimes I'm going to have to repeat a question once or twice just to make sure that we all understand it. But this one, I hear Richard C. Hoagland talk about this all the time. There is an amazing correlation to specific locations on Earth that other planets in the solar system have were repeated instances of large anomalies occur. Not even here, but in other planets. For example, the giant red spot, I'm not sure if this person means Jupiter, Mauna Loa, the volcano in Hawaii, Olympus Mons, etc. I think he means latitude 19.5. Your Terra entity sets, whose probabilistic projections have grown significantly throughout 2009, indicate that some major activity may be on the real horizon. Do you run calculations on the correlation coefficients for the hyperdimensional geometry subsets and the Terra entity sets to see if the data suggests that the major events might occur on the sacred geometry points on the Earth? Great question.
Great question, and the answer is yes. I do indeed run such correlations. I have for years. I've got a couple of globes here that I altered to show the standard Merkaba points, then a further level for the octahedronal points, and then I tessellated it even further to go into icosahedronal, and two levels of tessellation beyond that. So I've got a fairly good hyperdimensional model of the planet here, and we constantly relate our geographic references, such as they are allowed to come through in our software, to these points as we go along. That was what led us years ago to be able to say, oh, there's going to be an earthquake in Hawaii and it's going to be 6.3. Turned out that indeed they first claimed it was 6.3 and then downgraded it at 6.1, but it was within our time frame and on Hawaii. Now, we'd kind of screwed up because I thought it would be on the 50th parallel as opposed to the 50th state, but I was misreading some of the data at the point. But in any event, yes, the answer is that we do cross-correlate to that. We see a lot of information relating to that. For instance, I suspect that there, as a precursor to a grand mal seizure of the planet, if you will, that we should have a cracking, significant cracking of the Pacific plate, and I believe that it will be along on these tessellated points between two major hyperdimensional nexus seas, not necessarily the 19.47, but perhaps one tessellation above that, slightly closer to the equator.
And every time I think of latitude 19.5 and the tetrahedron, I think, when you said the word Merkaba, it immediately, before you said it, it came to mind. But you're speaking about the Pacific Ocean. Right now, there's a volcano erupting in the Ring of Fire in the Philippines. You think there's a correlation there?
Oh, correct. That's all quite related, and we should see much more volcanism as we progress here, because in my overall theory is that the windings on the sun are creating a giant squeeze through a magnetic containment vessel that we happen to call the solar system and in which we happen to live. Such a theory as I'm proposing here affects everything at the solar system level, the sun, all the way down into the planetary level, including all the way down into life on the planet. So we'll all be experiencing the effects of what we call the big squeeze. And one of the predictable effects of the big squeeze is a much greater level of volcanism on all planets.
Is there any suggestion in the subsets that the sacred geometric locations of the Earth may become more active?
Yes, indeed there is, but we've been very dismissive of that because we're rapidly approaching a point where it will be difficult to find places on the planet that are not so disposed to seismic activity and strange weather and so on, and it becomes extremely repetitious for us to dig that out of the data. Plus, it is a huge data set now relative to the Terra entity.
This one is from somebody who took your Alta report and just dissected it. Have you or anyone who you discussed the data with tried to identify potential areas that would positively correlate with multiple predictive subsets? For example, this listener, using 3 of your subsets, postulates: A, the Terra entity subset suggests an extreme winter, resulting in damage or damaged underground utilities, natural gas lines getting too cold for effective operations. B, the diaspora subset indicates that hundreds of thousands of humans will be on the road due to extreme of climate that will descend from the jet stream in late December. And C, the direct impact of the climate disruption on the transshipment of goods, and even information subsets become more stressed, leading to shipment breakdown. Therefore, seeing these events makes one think, where might one event actually become the cause for another? And this listener tried to locate areas where such an extreme climate event would shock the most likely unprepared area so badly that all the 3 subsets above would be irrelevant. What do you have to say about that?
What'd they find? Did they find a cool spot? I'm actually voting at this point for the UK and Northern Europe.
Well, here's what he said. The Seattle Puget Sound area where you are from, Cliff, last year, you had record snowfall events where people have potentially never seen such accumulations. If the jet stream were to fluctuate off of the Pacific coast enough to allow sub-zero Arctic winds to freeze your very shallow pipes, since it rarely freezes there, and the pipes are not deep, and commuting and transportation were to become very effective because your drivers are not accustomed to driving responsibility or cautiously, and many technological industries that are located in your area may not get to port A. Have you identified areas that fit multiple subsets and have significant correlation coefficients for matching scenarios for potential locations for these events? And then I have B and C, if you'd like to respond to A.
Yes, indeed, we have. Puget Sound was one of those we looked at, but the probability for the impact on Puget Sound is mitigated by extremely strange effects occurring in Alaska. So it would have been a very good hit, would have been a very good correlation if the jet stream hadn't split over Alaska this year. Because it did so, we're now looking antipodally, and therefore, even though they think they're prepared for it, we think it'll be Britain, Greater Britain, including Ireland, and then the northern part of Europe will get hit with extremely disruptive weather, which may be also oscillating. Extreme cold followed by a week of extreme precipitation, followed by a week of extreme cold, etc.
Then B, do you attempt, even if you do not pose them in your alter reports, to take the various subsets together to locate the most probable areas of effect?
We have in the past. It's a great deal of work. We did not do so with this particular run because of the impetus to do so was removed, in the sense that the reason that I'd done so in the past was that I had some people that were willing to take the risk that I would be wrong. They paid for the bandwidth for that to occur and then for the extra processing. They've apparently had it proven that it was worth their while, but they're also been hit by the economic situation, and they're not doing the kind of investing that they used to, so they don't need the service anymore. So there's really no drive for it.
And C, he asked it with trepidation, and he even said, don't ask it if you don't want to, but I will. Is this event going to occur around the Detroit, Michigan area, another area of already significant economic stress, coupled with extreme winters and populations that would potentially flood south to escape the deadly cold?
That's quite probable. We saw, I hate to have to be the bearer of bad news, but here was the issue. When we first started doing this for North America, or rather, let me put it this way. Let me step back a year. We'd had this situation arise where we'd had, if you will, vertical banding of weather across the whole planet. And Earth was having a vertical band that would go from the pole down to the equator, and it would shift along with the rotation. And these were new and slightly different. We'd forecast those. And then about a year ago, we'd forecast that there would be a change into this lateral banding that would be countercyclical in the two hemispheres, and it would lead to a situation of extreme cold in, say, the northern latitudes between 40 and 60, but perhaps extreme warm between 60 and 80, so that the Arctic would melt at the same time that we'd all be freezing our toes off down here in lower North America. And that's exactly what's started to develop. We did see the split in the jet stream over Alaska, which means that the jet stream area was driven off by a high that covered almost all of the Alaska area. This caused the jet stream to split north and south, taking the cold air north and over the Rockies down towards the central part of Canada, which resulted in the extreme cold in Canada, which will also sweep further south into North America, at the same time that a portion of the jet stream went south from Alaska, interconnected and hit us first with extreme cold. We had a very cold week here, and that's been followed by it's now joining with the Pineapple Express. So this will be aired on the 18th. So there's a possibility that, say, sometime in the week of the 20th, that if the jet stream continues to join with the Pineapple Express from the warmer latitudes, which are just bringing in huge amounts of precipitation, then both of those may join on the other side of the Rockies and come down with a giant level of snow and cold over the central area of the U.S., probably all the way over to the East Coast. And that would include Detroit, etc. So,
question, global warming, in your opinion, man-made or solar-produced?
Not a chance it's man-made. Absolute bullshit.
That's what I expected you to say. Having said that, the Copenhagen meetings that are taking place, do you see a global carbon tax happening just to unite the world and to tax us all?
Our data suggests that won't happen, that the forces against it and the chaos developing will preclude this. However, let me state that in the previous two issues of the shape of things to come, we'd pointed out the period of November when Obama and his people would be running around trying to solve some sort of international crises. Well, the international crises turned out not to be war as we'd anticipated, because we always get screwed up when we get down into the detail layer, but rather related to another forecast we had about whistleblowers who would release some stuff that would bring the planet to its knees. We thought it would be UFO kind of stuff, but it was related to the climate gate. And so now we have a juxtaposition of these two sets. And so we have the whistleblower set that created the chaos at Climate Gate, also with Climate Gate at the Copenhagen thing, also now manifesting in further leaks of other information. The walking out of all of these nations is not as is being described on the mainstream press. It's very real. They'll never sign it. Therefore, it might get down to the point where they may sign it, but it's meaningless because it's, 11 countries, 3 countries, something along those lines. And in the meantime, we should see the thrashing around in the background as the climate Nazis are running around trying to impose this treaty on everybody. And that would fulfill the international flying around of the Obama administration, as we had noted. Again, also, we see that there's a certain level of urgency involved, so we've nailed the emotional aspects of it because we now have the Toady Brown, the guy who is the Prime Minister of England. He's going over there early, all of this kind of stuff, trying to save this conference. So all those conditions are being met in Climate Gate. If that is the case, that we continue to see the language build that way, then our data suggests by February or so it'll be absolutely meaningless. And so even if they sign it, it'll have no net effect.
And by the way, folks, when we refer to Climate Gate, we're referring to the hacking of the University of East Anglia that started all of this right now. But I'm surprised, or I guess I shouldn't be surprised, that the Obama administration or other world leaders have not really made comments about the discoveries of all these emails and information, looking at how much this was hoaxed.
Yeah, it's goofy, isn't it? Yeah.
I wonder what Al Gore is saying about those emails. Now, you have mentioned that the Earth Changes subset is the largest and has been growing. It is currently 5 times larger than any other aggregate set and 2 times greater than all the other sets combined. Is that because any significant Earth-changing event, i.e. earthquake, tsunami, or a drastic jet stream alteration, would result in the other subsets occurring? Example, massive economic decay or diaspora events, thus leading more hits back to the Earth changes events. Is that why it would be the largest? Because if any significant event in the Earth changes subset would probably be the precursor to other subset events?
It's probably mostly the latter, in the sense that any event within the Terra entity subsets is a precursor to other subsets triggering off. However, they are much more internal to the Terra entity. No, actually, to a certain extent, that's true. That because everything is interrelated and no 2 earthquakes are separate events on the same planet, we have a situation where economics dominates all. To a certain extent, the premise is true there, that the Terra entity is the largest, the Earth changes are the largest, simply because everything is dependent upon it. But also there's another reason that I think may be more key, and that is that because we work at an archetype level and humans are bound to and are creatures of this planet, and we look at it at a different level of connection, that it's a yin planet and we are yang creatures, neither of which could exist without the other, and the bonds between them are a complexity beyond our ability to understand. I actually believe that it is that bond that drives our linguistic associations with the planet, and that's why we have the Terra entity the way we do. Bear in mind that when we first started our work in 1997, the very first sets that came out, in fact, our whole model space was 100% structured towards economics, and yet the very first sets that came out were all archetypically related to the planet and the sun. Totally unexpected, blew me out of the water and started me on this path.
Now, you have mentioned in the past that your Alta reports are read by many, and this is a question I've asked you before, but it's okay for somebody to ask it again. You have mentioned that in the past that your Alta reports are read by many...
Can I get you to hang on just a second, please?
Yes.
You just got to grab the phone here.
Yeah.
Hello? Okay, I'm on the phone. Bye. Sorry about that. Okay.
Yeah, pizza delivery, right?
No, it was George Ure. He was just calling to BS for a while.
You have mentioned in the past that your Alta reports are read by many areas of human governments and society. We certainly hope so, in hopes that the events such as the Israeli mistake do not come to pass, given how the predictive language the bots have generated would suggest an event that was not foreseen occurring after what would be planned as a routine bombing mission. How much effect does your publicized predictive set have, do you speculate, in actually decreasing or increasing the probability of certain events from happening?
I'd rather not say. I'd rather not even say why I don't want to say.
Give us a hint.
The reason is that if I were to give details on my speculation on this, it would change the variables in the equation that we know to be operating. And so I can say that we, myself, Igor, the other people associated with the project here, have evidence to support the idea that indeed we do make a difference. And that it is my hope that one day we shall be able to produce such a report that it will be 100% wrong because there will be enough of a difference involved. That'll never come. But we do make a difference. And I can't speculate any further. I'd rather not go into it any further than that.
That's fine. And I may have mentioned this in the past show that you and I did, but I'm in communication with somebody who I trust, who was related to the NSA and CIA, and he reads her reports. And he told me that the Israelis and the Mossad used that report and were taking under consideration what you said about November the 2nd, and they may indeed change that date. Whether this is true or not, I don't know, but I just wanted to relay that information to you.
I'd rather not comment on that too. This is great though. I mean, if that's true, then shalom and peace to us all. Glad
Exactly.
that they're starting to wise up.
Right. Now, the supporting sets for the decay of the planetary markets include language suggesting huge impacts on the social order in China and a shift to internal isolated market structure for India. How much of that data actually comes from the millions of Chinese and Indian websites and fora? And I have another branch of that question, but if you'd like to take the first one first.
Probably, I would say 40% of that data, somewhere in that realm. If we just take the lexicon as a whole and slice it and dice it based on language, we have a number of the India-centric languages, including Farsi at the far side, all the way through Pali and some of these others that we monitor, as well as English. We also are able to get a decent percentage of Chinese dialects. Bear in mind that there's, at least 140 that I'm aware of. So, but about 40% of that data is coming from our ability to hit those servers. It would have and has been higher in the past, but China has become extremely restrictive both ways. Not only are they screening stuff out coming into them, they're also screening the ability to touch their servers from the outside.
Not to pry into your specifics of your system, but how does your system do it with foreign languages like Chinese and Persian, for example?
Well, we have a number of the lexicon is just basically a huge list of words. Mm-hmm. And since we're talking multi-byte languages, I have a multi-byte representation of the words from various Chinese and Farsi or Persian dialects.
Right.
And they're listed in the lexicon. So we might have a word in there, cost, or that might list price. And we might find that we have the Chinese words and variants for the cost of doing business and everything. As we go through in our context there as well was Pali and Hindi and Pathan and various different other dialects. We would have those words for cost and price because they are an essential part of the context of the economy of the planet. And many people in their conversations on their local languages would, of course, reference this, and so we can pick it up that way. Does that make sense?
Yes, and that's why I ask you, because, for example, one word in Cantonese might mean something different in Mandarin, or maybe in subset languages of the Farsi language.
Yeah, but that's not true at a multi-byte representation. That's not true at the computer representation of it, in the sense that it's not the same exact multi-byte character set for each word because they're in different language sets. And those are easily identified with the multi-byte language headers for the character sets you're working with. It's not like ASCII used to be where we had 256 bits.
Yes.
And we had to deal with everything that way. Now we've got a plethora of descriptors around each character set that we're dealing with in each font. So when our spiders go through, that stuff is just stripped right off and we know exactly what we're dealing with.
Have you noticed a spatial correlation between where your bots gather their data to events that have a higher probability of occurring based on their location and significance to who is, even indirectly, suggesting what?
No, and we'll never do that simply because we don't track the who connected to the what they're saying. And while we do know where we're getting the information from, and in a general sense we know who's putting the information there, we never keep any of that stuff. It's just stored at this rather obtuse level. And we don't have any way to cross-connect to geography. That's a very interesting question, though. I'd never really considered. If I'd wanted to rewrite the software, I could do that. But at this point, we can't.
And this one, now we're getting into the economic parts, which I'm fascinated with, and the interaction with your alter reports. The data suggests that corporate globalism or planetary corporate fascism will be offered to the peoples of the planet over the next year, with the largest emotional push for the global central banking system and conversion of all currencies to digital wealth. Is this a repeat of the instances where George Bush Sr. famously stated the New World Order line, and when Bill Clinton also repeated statements regarding New World Order? In other words, are your bots suggesting that those initial statements may actually be presented to the population as so many prophecies have predicted to occur at the end of the age anyway? Thank you very much for listening to the 1-year anniversary of the Veritas Show with our special guest, Clif High. Clif High's website is halfpasthuman.com. We still have 2 more hours to go with Clif, commercial-free as always. Head on over to our website, veritasshow.com, click on subscribe, and join us in the members area to tune in to the second part, 2 more hours of this great show. And remember, I have included a bonus interview with Zachariah Sitchin, which is only available to members. We'll take a short break, listen to a song by the band Eat More Cake entitled Red Sky. And at the end of the show, I have included another song of this great band, so don't miss it. We'll be right back with more of Clif High.
This is Nick Redfern, and you're listening to The Veritas Show. This is Nick Redfern, and you're listening to The Veritas Show.
And this one, now we're getting into the economic parts, which I'm fascinated with, and the interaction with your alter reports. The data suggests that corporate globalism or planetary corporate fascism will be offered to the peoples of the planet over the next year, with the largest emotional push for the global central banking system and conversion of all currencies to digital wealth. Is this a repeat of the instances where George Bush Sr. famously stated the New World Order line, and when Bill Clinton also repeated statements regarding New World Order? In other words, are your bots suggesting that those initial statements may actually be presented to the population as so many prophecies have predicted to occur at the end of the age anyway?
I believe that they will indeed be presented, whether they actually use those particular words of, hey, y'all, come and support the New World Order. I don't really think so. It'll be a little bit more disguised than that, I think. But indeed, we're seeing it with the Copenhagen Agreement. If they had been able to ram through the Copenhagen Agreement, and they've got 100 plus countries, and they expect to get the others signed up, then basically everything you're talking about is right there, because it supersedes all constitutions. It allows the governing body, which is this unelected group, this junta, to direct taxes, flows of money, all of this kind of stuff, as well as control central banks relative to the carbon taxes and so on. So it is very close in any event. But yes, indeed, that's what the data is suggesting, is that we will face this being rolled out next year in the midst of all of the chaos. Remember, their structure is stated on everything, ordo ob chaos, order from chaos. That's their motto. We give you chaos, and then we're going to give you order. And boy, we want you to sign up for this order deal. We're good guys. We just want to have you as our slave and feed you nicely and only beat you every third day.
Liberty for security.
No, freedom for security.
Freedom for security. Right.
You're talking to a linguist here.
That's
Remember,
right.
Liberty is something that is granted to you. So the military grants you liberty to leave the base for the weekend. Freedom is something you take.
Were you an attorney in a different life, Clif?
No, but I've taken legal courses just to be able to navigate our legal system and keep myself mostly out of trouble. So I've taken pre-law courses, torts, contracts, that kind of thing.
And by the way, speaking of George Bush Sr., you remember September the 11th, 1990, solar minimum, when he said those words, New World Order. And then September the 11th, 2001, solar maximum. Do you find that correlation interesting?
Yes, indeed. I find it very interesting, especially since we find that theoretically the next solar maximum cycle peak would have been 2012, 11:11 a.m.
Exactly.
And that's curiously when the Pope Gregory spent a bunch of money on some German mathematicians, a whole crowd of them, like 30 of them, to convert their calendar over. And when they did it, they worked it all out so that the Mayan calendar would end in at this particular time on 2012. It was not by coincidence. So yes, it's extremely meaningful, I think. These people are sun worshipers. They know about the sun cycle. They know what's coming. They can read the numbers that are encapsulated within the Mayan and Egyptian and other ancient histories. These numbers that are encapsulated in there and encoded are very unique. They're only found in nature in specific places. So, for instance, scientists from one species can communicate to scientists of another species starting with the frequency of hydrogen, because throughout the universe it's the same. We can, more or less. We can also discuss within our solar system specific items over generations by just encoding certain frequencies. And 927, 927, or 972, 972, 972 is a repetitious number that's involved in the sunspot cycle relative to the polar spin of the sun. Knowing that number doesn't show up anywhere else in this particular format, if you encode it, you're basically telling someone else who knows this, hey, pay attention to the polar rotation of the sun. And the fact that we find 11 both in the 9 and the 11 is more than simply symbolic of their intent at the esoteric level. It is actually representational of these grand cycles. Just as I happen to find the swastika from its first incarnation in ancient times and ancient civilizations all around the planet very meaningful, because when we get to the end of the sunspot cycle, I expect all of the magnetic fields to wrap up to basically 4 twisted arms that should be clearly visible if you were looking down on the sun or looking at the sun from either pole.
What is the effect of that to the humankind, if and when that happens?
Oh, it's going to fry us all. If you're not protecting yourself and taking an action from this, you will suffer the results of the cataclysm. Bear in mind that in spite of what anybody else will tell you, one thing is certainly true. The Earth upon which we exist and the solar system in which it exists is not stable, and we have demonstrable evidence that there's a cycle of instability that is related to other cycles, and the major cycles are 11,500 years out to about 12,000 years, and we are at the end of one of those cycles. Therefore, it should not surprise anybody when we get a cataclysm, as the end of every other one of these 11,500 year cycles also is ended in a cataclysm.
The markets, the entity, and the powers that be entities suggest upcoming periods of social chaos within the Anglosphere, potentially resulting in civil warfare. I even read yesterday, I believe, that the Obama administration is looking for 1 million soldiers to patrol the streets, and we've talked about this before, in case of civil war. Is there a reason that the powers that want to be are so concerned about warfare in the Anglosphere as opposed to anywhere else? Do they not fear the 1.2 billion Chinese rising up? Do they not fear the millions of South Americans retaking their cities and rising up? Do they not fear the French rise? Oh, never mind. Anyway, why is civil war always in regards to the Anglosphere when the entire continent of Africa is unstable, and yet it is the majority of the world's mineral wealth is located there? Is it because of the powers that be fear an even remotely organized assemblage of armed militias across the U.S., Canada, Mexico, and across Europe?
That's pretty much the case. Let's deal with Africa first. Africa has been constantly subjected to disruptive influences and will continue to be so because the powers that be can gain the most profit from a disrupted Africa. So it's a different situation there as opposed to what we call the Anglosphere. You'll note that actually the Anglosphere now needs, in this particular instance, to be redefined to the American continent. And we can leave out Australia and we can leave out Britain because they've effectively had their armed citizenry removed in the sense that they've been disarmed over these past years with very different kinds of machinations by the powers that be. So really, they fear the American populace, where there's something, if we were to just use broad numbers, we can say there's probably 8 weapons in the form of guns with enough ammo to shoot them at least once or twice to every single person in the country. And it's actually saying it's 8, we might as well say 10 or 20, because the powers that be have no way of knowing, but they do know we're the most heavily armed populace on the planet. And also, there has been repeated demonstrations by this populace of the willingness to use force in the exercise of their frustrations, and that force has not been limited to just protests. For instance, I happen to live in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm also a student of history. And if you go back, you look at the history, especially in the 1930s, of the various social movements here in the Pacific Northwest, and you will see that there are many instances where these social movements had to be put down by armed forces from the governments at the time, in this case, local soldiers. We also saw that with the disruptions in the 30s in the Northeast, where factory workers would take over factories, and the response was to try and kick them out with soldiers. Now the situation is much different. The spread of wealth across the United States in the generation after World War II led to an unexpected side effect to the powers that be, and that was the proclivity to acquire and store weapons and ammunition ballooned all out of proportion while they weren't looking. So the ratio of weapons to populace spiraled up to a level where they were just quite shocked. I happen to work on some things called base expectancy studies, computer analysis at a very high level, where you code all of this information in to provide these broad looks, the way basically that Buckminster Fuller used to look at things. And I did this as learning my trade, so to speak, as a programmer for some of the government agencies. And I was actually involved in one where their goal was to find out what was the ratio of weapons and the capability to the populace in the United States, and they were unable to determine a number that was accurate simply because there were too many variables, but they knew it was greater than 51%. And by their definition, that meant that 51% of the adult males had enough weapons to be a problem, basically. And that really concerns them. And no, they are not particularly worried about the Chinese because of the nature of the Chinese citizenry, the nature of the controls there, and the internal problems of China are such that Chinese rebellion basically will be suppressed until the point that it erupts into civil war. And if it erupts into civil war, it will probably be something on the order of horrors not seen since the March of the Blue Ants, or the Long March, they called it. So, but at the moment, they see that as being able to be suppressed given the economic conditions and so on. The issue there is rising into an economic power, if you will. You're very much less likely to jeopardize that in the first or second generation. It's only the third generation that has had any kind of economic success where you get back to the point where you're willing to risk it for a philosophical viewpoint. Make sense?
Yes, it does. And you and I have spoken about this before regarding it's highly unlikely that they can really crack down on the Second Amendment. However, is there something in your predictive language that says that perhaps ammunition may be curtailed to the point that may affect gun owners?
There is that, but beyond July, any data along those lines will be meaningless, because the chaos that we've got relative to the social order seems to really, if you will, reach a hot latte level where it's being foamed out sometime in July. And thereafter, I think all of the details that we have down at that level would become sketchy or much less reliable than they are now. Bear in mind that basically when we look at our data, you have to look at it as though I've got one of those cones on my head that they put around dogs.
Yes.
So that I have this view. But in order to get down into that far edge of where that cone is within the data, it means that I'm deliberately obscuring my vision to any of the other stuff that's also affecting at that level. And that's where all of the chaos is, and that's where all of the sets are interrelated. So the further deep I go that way, the more likely I am to be wrong.
You have mentioned that there are many subsets in support of the awakening set, including spiritual, economic, military, and science, and others. But or in their term pointing back to the powers that be views that any form of awakening is a danger to them, A, do your data suggest a higher probability of any of those subsets actually occurring? Or B, the powers that be are based on the data sets most concerned about the Earth changes subset. Is that because of Earth changes subset could trigger all of the others?
The latter is true, but I don't know that that's the core of their fear. They're very afraid of the awakening, and in fact, they now realize that it's impossible to stop at this point. So they're now we're moving into contingency plans, so we'll see some weird effects of that over this next year. But yes, indeed, they are very afraid. They know that there's a hard stop. They know that there's some earth changes coming that are going to be cataclysmic or catastrophic relative to the social order, and that, I think, is their driving impetus at the moment. They would like us to all sign on and be happy little slaves as they organize all of this right up to the last minute. They are very much afraid of any kind of a froth period between now and then, and they're very much afraid that some significant earth changes could precipitate some of the awakening, but they know the awakening is going to occur in any event.
Cliff, you have multiple sets that suggest the disintegration of organized religions in the upcoming years. Although on the surface level, one could imagine that this would result in chaos, and that is the data sets might recognize such extremely suggestive language. Do the data sets ever suggest positive language with the massive amounts of change that is potentially coming? Because from a more Zen point of view, death is not necessarily negative, and there must be the death before the glorious rebirth of a new system. Therefore, do your data sets suggest positive outcomes, maybe a little further down the line, that may be indicative of the dawn of the new age actually occurring?
I'd have to say yes, but we have some big hiccups between then and now. The then would probably be around 2021 or so, because bear in mind we have long-range data sets that indicate that the descendants of the people of this time will be erecting monuments to it, to us, to those of us that live through it. And we've had this monumental metadata layer for a number of years, And from our viewpoint, we actually have to turn around and look at it as epic, because you don't live through monumental is a past-looking approach to things, whereas epic is as you go through it, you know you're in epic times. So there are certainly positives that come out of it. The death of the religion stuff is certainly, in my view, positive, because I'm anti-control system, and I find all religions to be a control system at one level or another. But the negative aspects of going through the froth as all of this occurs is actually being borne out in the manifestations that we're seeing now. So let me sort of stop and say that the death of organized religion is occurring as we speak, and we're seeing some data points come out that have a high amount of visibility, in the sense of there's a number of surveys that come out that say that people go out and they do religious shopping and, try this religion on and that one and so on. And this is all an indication of the death of organized religion, where the key word is the organization or the imposition of the religion from one generation to the next as a control mechanism. And so in that sense, organized religion will die. The idea that, for instance, because your father was a Beatles worshiper, you should be a Beatles worshiper too, is now dying, in the sense that you may like the Stones, that kind of thing. And you may decide, well, I'm going to go and listen to reggae and see if I like that. And we're just now applying that to a religious or a sense, which is not the same thing as spiritual. The negative component of this will be that there's a high level of anxiety accompanied with the religious death in our froth or chaos language, relative to a subset of the global populace that basically needs, at a personality level, that control system to exist in order for them to feel good. So, for instance, there will be a lot of people that, just to pick an example, are diehard Rastafarians, and if there was a Rastafarian Pope and a Rastafarian church, they would need that structure to exist in the future in order to feel good. So they won't be feeling too good as we get into latter part of 2011 and into 2012, and much further beyond that, they won't feel very good in a religious sense at all. This will cause a great deal of stress, and these individuals may react inappropriately.
I like the metaphor of the Beatles and the Stones, and by the way, they already have their own martyr, if you will, in Bob Marley. But anyway, the data sets paint a picture of agents of these secret societies who will be misguided and will be messing with the wrong people. And I have to watch with this question. It has a few things that I have to censor. The wrong people at precisely the wrong point in time. The interpretive language then states that, and I don't know what, no scene or no sign, GNOS.
However.
Right. The descriptor sets of the space goat farts entity contains support aspect attribute sets for the curious, opportune feeling, time, synchronicity occurring.
Yeah, it's a weird way of stating that what will occur is maybe sort of like a universe providing us with random acts of kindness. And so let me give it a concrete example of what you just described. Let's say that there's an individual in the French Alps in late winter. This individual is a skier, is there for skiing. The weather is semi-decent for skiing. And this individual also has a high woo-woo world profile. And agents of the nefarious powers that be decide that because of this position that this fellow is in, they might do something like smash him into a tree to make it look like he was just a poor skier and, happened to hit that one tree on that whole course and died. And their whole point, of course, is to get rid of this particular individual. What we're describing is a situation where that individual will be presented with a feeling, an intuitive bubble, if you will, that will exist because universe is providing kairos, which is the quality of time. The quality and feeling of time is going to change for a number of individuals, good and bad. And when it's good for the guy who's skiing, it will be bad for the guys who are trying to push him into the tree. Sort of makes sense?
It does, and I don't know why I'm thinking of Sonny Bono on this one.
That's not a bad thought, and the fact that someone might be suicided a la Kelly or Bono is very much a pertinent part of our reality. It's sad to say, but basically what we're running into, by the way, is at a very deep level in the woo-woo side, in the energetic side of the universe. Imagine, for instance, that it's true that my view is that nothing material actually exists and it's nothing more than an energetic illusion. Within the concept of how we understand energy, there would be flux and flow and pressure waves and so on. And so we see that demonstrated in the universe now when a jet airplane goes too fast and it creates too much of a pressure wave ahead of its wings and it cracks and we get the sonic boom effect. Well, at a smaller, subtler level, individuals who would be electromagnetically sensitive, if you will, or time sensitive, may be able to catch pressure waves ahead of the crack of the sonic boom and thus stop, move, twist, whatever is required at the time, and that these incidences will increase in the future as the amount of pressure is increasing around all of us.
An extension of the comment I made, does this suggest that certain individuals, maybe those who are aware of potential, shall I say, downloads, may receive either triggering messages or assistance from friends above?
I don't get into that. Telepathy is certainly within the concept of the energetic structure of the universe. Our data in Space Goat Farts has holders for that, but the whole area is so polluted with self-aggrandized channeling that it's made that data stream unreliable.
And this last portion of this statement, let me abbreviate. Do you really have a WTF data set, page 19 of 58? Last line. Did you really need to explain what WTF means in your Alta report? I mean, really, WTF.
Yeah, I probably didn't. But there's many non-English readers that we have to watch out for colloquialism,
right?
and expressions. And many times I'm taken to task by people who have a very good grasp of, say, business English, and not too good of a grasp of, say, street English. And you have to pardon my tongue at the moment. I've been reading far too much Russian, so I'm starting to mispronounce C's and S's and R's and all of that.
Right. Now, the National Impacting Commodity Shortage indicator language could be applied to many things. Cigarettes, coffee, as you use, for example, liquor, fresh underwear. No, not fresh, underwear. Fresh underwear, etc. To any of your data, give statistically significant hits from certain commodities that, beyond the aforementioned common sense items, may have surprised you to see suggested. In other words, what should we buy stock in stocks even were to matter after events that would make commodities become equivalent to gold to some people?
Yeah, I wouldn't buy any paper of any form. There are some very reliable individuals like Bob Chapman, for instance, that think that stocks in gold and silver might be okay. And if that's the case, if stocks survive in any way, shape, or form, gold and silver stocks would certainly be the best. And I would say that we do have some statistical indicators that indicate that we're going to have if you will, a bifurcation of inflation that will lead to a hyperinflationary state relative to the shortages. Bear in mind that you can get hyperinflation by too much money chasing goods, or you can get hyperinflation by too few goods being able to be chased. And we're going to have both of those sets occur. So we certainly see gold and silver. Those have words around them like panic to buy over the first part of this next year. We're going to get to the point where the financial system is so stressed that all of a sudden a wave will start erupting through the, let's just call them the unaware individuals at the moment, if there are any out there left. And these people will become panicked to buy gold and silver in any form, which unfortunately is going to lead to a lot of counterfeit and a lot of disruption. And people misplacing their money, so that people should be very well advised to do due diligence. Don't accept anybody's word for anything as anything. If someone tells you it's gold, get it proven to your satisfaction before transferring your life savings for it. Then on the other side, we're going to see the shortages hit, and those primarily seem to relate to food items and the energy necessary to process food items and ancillary things to food items. By ancillary, I mean those kind of food items that are both, say, a source for drugs and a source for food, like spinach is used to, and seaweed are used to make CoQ10. And there'll be pressures on the production of CoQ10 because there will be pressures on spinach as a food source. Make sense?
Yes, it does. Now, the data suggests that the death of the dollar might pull the veil off the religious corporations as they become fiscally and financially unstable over the next few months of 2010. Obviously, the dollar's death will crumble the political structure as well. Might there be exposed the true linkages and hypocrisy of the continued lie that is the connection between church and state in the U.S., will there become exposed the fraudulent nature of organized religion, since the Catholic Church is the world's most powerful and wealthy organization?
Yes. The simple answer is quite simply yes. Especially with the place of the sorcerers, the Vatican, that's going to be extremely hard hit. And I find it difficult as a rational being to be able to structure a mental construct that would allow Catholics in the year, say, 2012, late 2012 into 13 and beyond, to even give any credence at all to the Vatican. It will come out because of other issues relative to the shortages and the food riots and so on, but there's many deep, dark, hidden secrets in the religious organizations that are of control nature that will certainly cause those levels to bust up. And the Vatican has the highest level of visibility.
You remember back December 31st, 1999, Y2K, the world's going to end, blah, 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 nothing happened.
No, that's not true. I'm sorry, that's not true. Tons of stuff actually happened. I was a software engineer all through the 90s, and I made some significant amounts of money working my butt off for years, correcting code everywhere. And there were some significant disruptions at commercial levels in all kinds of machinery and in the telephone industry and the wire transfer industry. None of it was made public, but the levels of disruption were quite startling. I actually ended up, curiously, with a souvenir of that time. I got a batch of detergent, for washing clothes, where the machinery had screwed up because of Y2K and put in no suds reducers, no inhibitors whatsoever. So you put a little tiny drop of this stuff in and you can't get the suds out of the machine for days. And they actually admitted it was a Y2K glitch, and I happen to know the guys who programmed it. And there were also Y2K glitches on things like well pump heads and all different kinds of stuff. But in the main, Y2K did not happen because of the huge amount of money and work that was poured into it by software engineers all over the planet. And as proof of this, I offer the crash in 2000 of the whole software industry, the mass layoffs that triggered the bloom of internet companies, and then their crash because there was no there.
Right. Now, but what I'm trying to say is it was not chaotic worldwide, and perhaps because there was so much money put into it with programmers like you who address that. But what I'm trying to say is the government or the powers that be expected something to happen, or at least the psyche from people. Could the same thing be applied to 2012? Maybe not a natural disaster, but perhaps a self-inflicted natural disaster, a false flag, Project Bluebeam, something. Do you see that happening?
No, for a number of different reasons. You have to take a really broad view. And so let's just deal with 2012, and then let's jump back to the year 2000 in a second. 2012, we have a number of issues that don't relate to the powers that be at all. And we're talking about as I estimate it, 1 to 10 billion human calories were consumed in the chiseling of the various different encodings from the Mayan alone. In their structure of their buildings and all of this, they put in all the encoded information I was speaking of in terms of these particular numbers that are related to the sunspot cycle, and it cost them billions of calories. For a society to invest billions of calories in doing something like that, it is not a trivial issue. It goes beyond anything our religion is, religious structures has ever demanded of anybody. It would be like all of the cathedrals that we've got now being replicated all over the whole planet in every little burg to be an appropriate proportional measure of what the Mayans put into getting this information across. So you don't do that at a trivial level. You don't do that unless you're actually attempting to communicate information. Then the fact that it's not only the Mayans, but it's also around to all these other ancient civilizations, and they're all saying the same thing. Then there's the historical level of geographic or geologic evidence that we're in a cataclysmic universe, and that cataclysms occur with some actual disgusting regularity. And then there's the further issues that we're actually seeing those cataclysms manifest at a geologic and, if you will, time scale in all of the planets of the solar system right now. If you're not paranoid about the weather and everything on every single planet, you're simply not paying attention. Things have changed radically in the last 8 years, and they were on the march in terms of changes the previous 40. The sun's changed greatly. So there's so many indicators of the natural world manifesting right now that things ain't right in my brief lifetime, which is statistically improbable, that I find that question that I must be real clear. There's physical things happening on the planet right now, including a helicopter hovering overhead, but that's a secondary issue, that indicate that this indeed is something we must pay attention to. Now, as to the other issue as to whether it could be a Y2K kind of a thing being used against the populace, I agree with that. But I have to be very clear about it, in spite of the fact that it's going to be used by the powers that be against the populace, and in spite of the fact that they're going to use it to manipulate emotions, create fear, cause trauma, and so on, for their ability to control. Nonetheless, there is a physical reality behind it, and if you don't sense that, you're simply not paying attention.
Right. Now, this one comes from a professor. The data sets suggest the collapse of the dollar may result in rioting, onset from multiple sectors, tax revolts, lack of benefits coming through, etc. However, you specifically mention universities and campus riots, which happens to encompass some of the most privileged citizens of the Anglosphere society, mostly wealthy, white middle upper class 20-year-old young adults. Are the campus riots significant because they would be far more difficult to hide from the mainstream media than, say, a farmers' revolt in the middle of Iowa?
That's precisely the case. The reason that we even focused on it was because the visibility level was so high. Because it was it's going to be within the mainstream press, they're going to have echoes, and they're going to try and put it back to the campus revolution kind of stuff of the 60s. Even though they will be forced to acknowledge that it's economically based, they will nonetheless try and disseminate or spin the thing. But it will be very high visibility. And the fact that there's a lot of privileged kids there is a little bit is masking a subset of people who will be cut off instantly once the government gets to a certain level of crises. And that's all the people that are 100% dependent on government aid, one form or another, to either continue to teach or to continue to be a student. And these people will just one day wake up and find the world suddenly changed, as well as pressure on them from the other side, which is that the collapsing dollar will be raising their cost exponentially, the credit card system will be breaking down, and they won't have ready access to any further credit, which gets them into further raspy mood. Plus, these people are at a young enough age that the testosterone and estrogen effects on their mindset will be such that they'll go on out and want to express this physically. Whereas, as we must note, the farmer out in the rural areas, he's going to be a tired guy, and he won't want to go riot.
Well, this person says, I'm only stating this because of the sick irony of students rioting on the campus, where it is safe to mop around and burn their federally subsidized couches instead of going downtown and pitchforking the governor's house like a real good old uprising, usually like Viva la Revolution or Viva la France. Do you at least find it anomalous that you see the drunken data language concerning the response to student uprisings? Are you sure that those two data sets do not describe each other?
At one level, they may indeed describe each other, and unfortunately, or fortunately for all of us, these will not be confined to the universities. I fully expect the pitchforks to be heading out in a generalized sense, because the second level of the rioting that will come from this will be at all of the parents of all of these students. And we're going to get to a point where the coagulation caused by the dollar destruction will actually trap a lot of students in universities with no support and no way to get home. That'll cause anxiety for their parents. The parents will go to the government demanding a resolution of this, and so on and so on. So the point is very well taken, and the irony of it is not lost on me, but it was just beyond my ability to express adequately.
You mentioned the many areas of social infrastructure that would be associated with the disruption postulated by your data sets in 2010. A. Does your data suggest any single or significant individuals becoming figureheads for the uprisings, or individual leaders who will organize after or during the fall of one of all these systems? And then I have a B and a C, but let's take it one by one.
Yes, the data does, and that's something I simply won't discuss other than what I've let out. The only person I've really singled out is the dog poet.
Right, and I do have a question about the dog poet later. Does your data suggest the powers that be targeting individuals during the chaos of elimination towards the small rishi or nosiness? In other words, specific individuals who know of information the powers that be would rather not, like William Cooper, being targeted during a national crisis?
Yes, it does specifically go to that. That's why we're doing the Gary McKinnon work, and that's why I brought up the issue of the Kyrios and the example of the skier. Those are exactly to that point. They will be doing this kind of thing, but I was just kind of pointing out to people sort of in a sense, be aware of your intuition. The time will favor you.
Now, does the data set suggest any interaction with other worldly beings during this time, and potentially what the purpose of this contact may be for?
It certainly does. We have very large archetypes towards the whole off-planet interaction, both for humans and non-humans. Purpose is that's a gray area that my comments on it would be purely speculation. The way we get purpose out of the data, I have a tendency to quarantine that kind of data because it always comes out within somebody's context for their religious view or worldview, and so we don't really want to bring in that level of emotionalism when we deal with the archetypes. It has a tendency to obscure things and make them too hot, so to speak, and we really live and die within the nuance of data shifts. So large, abrupt shifts don't really give us much to work with.
Does your data set suggest any events provoked by the powers that be during any of these chaotic events that might be seen as an acceleration to massive population reduction?
Yeah, we have some temporal markers that are not good ones. Some of the examples we've had in our previous SHAPE reports include the outflow of people from the Olympics, the inflow of people from the military and the holidays after just being vaccinated. This will cause a bunch of hotspots of disease radiating out. They'll, swine flu-ish, so to speak. We see that coming up. Another temporal marker would be, say, something that was disruptive to the current occupier of the presidential office in or before the equinox, with the expectation that it would have ripples out in time, regardless of what that disruption might show up as, health or otherwise. So there are certain temporal markers. We put what we can in the reports. I know a lot more, so I'm very hesitant to just start blurting them out because I don't want to let out some that we deliberately wanted to obscure.
Now, you mentioned swine flu. Last time we spoke, we talked a lot about that. Does it feel to you almost like the calm before the storm? We talked about how they were going to try it, and they were going to try it again January or February. Is that still in play?
Yeah, we're in the midst of it right now. You've actually caught that. Remember, we discussed the fact that there would be an interval when it would just sort of fade a bit, and then it would resurface again in January, February as the Olympics were underway. And that will be the case.
Ukraine. What do you see coming from Ukraine? You know what I mean.
Yes, indeed. That's a very interesting situation where, let me be clear about this, where forces, and you can expand that word as you choose in your own mind, forces are pushing and causing things to occur that are not necessarily natural, and that an expansion of that is likely to move as the planet rotates. We got to be real careful about some of this stuff because I don't want to start off a self-fulfilling prophecy sort of a deal, and nor would I want to expose levels of information that we haven't already put out in some relatively sensitive areas. I don't want to be, all classified or any of that kind of stuff here, but if, for instance, I knew that there was going to be a great revolutionary figure that would lead us all to the golden age, I'd be a real fool to point it out to people in the radio at this kind of a moment, just as it would be inappropriate for me to comment on dire information when there is some potential that doing that would reinforce the words around that, and we wouldn't necessarily want to. So in other words, if I knew that that by not talking about a particular fleas on a dog, that the fleas would get discouraged and go away, then I would simply not talk about them.
Well, what I'm referring to is that last time we spoke, you said, and we read this on the paper, that, for example, Ukraine, Dr. Joseph Moshe, you probably heard about that name.
Yes,
He called it a doctorate and so on. He disappeared. Some say that he's back in Israel.
Some say he's in detention, right.
In detention, right, kidnapped or abducted.
And I thought you were talking about Ukraine in the future, but in the current, more or less present, I understand now, yeah. We do expect more from that, and this is just a pattern. The release of the influence in the Ukraine appears to be related to Baxter or one of the other chem companies in that area. The spraying was very peculiar. The low nature of it, the reports of the smell the petroleum and all of this in the major areas that were infected, all very, very, very peculiar. And so we can expect that pattern to be repeated. If they deem this to have been a success, that's the area where I don't really want to comment.
No, that's fine. Let me comment. We spoke about this, how they were preparing a more powerful version or strain of this virus. And this is more or less what's happening here in Ukraine. And I had a show with Dr. Leonard Horowitz, and while we were doing the show, I remember on the website, visitors from Baxter and Hoffman La Rouge visiting the website. So you wonder.
Yeah, curiosities abound, yes.
Exactly. So do you have something to say of the sacred knowledge that is hidden in the Vatican or has been suppressed and sequestered for generations by the Church?
Well, curiously, in my past, I have a incident in which I actually saw firsthand how knowledge is suppressed that way. So I know that it exists. If we have the time, I'll tell you the story. It's a little bit involved and
we do.
Kind of long. Let me cough here. It's been extremely dry, and now we've been hit by this Pineapple Express, and anything in the trees is down, so I'm suffering some of the sinus effects. Yeah. But in my history, I am an Army brat. I just happened to be of an age when, as Army brats, we were shipped over as part of the immediate post-occupation forces into Germany. When I was in Germany, I was in southern Germany in the southern states near the Bavarian border, in an area, Friedrichsburg, Mannheim, Stuttgart, this kind of thing. For a while, I lived in this place called Benjamin Franklin Village. In the early days, Benjamin Franklin Village, they always name these housing developments after famous Americans. It's just part of the inculcation of the culture of the military. But when I was there, the base, if you will, had yet to really be constructed for all the dependents, and there was a bit of freedom that didn't exist later as the whole culture there matured. For instance, when I first got there, the library was housed in an old SS building. This SS building was some 5 stories tall, I believe, and was relatively undamaged by the bombing and so forth during the war. And so they used it as a base library, even though technically it wasn't even on the base at that point. You had to go through this little section of woods to get to it. And you knew it was an SS building because it was composed of the dark, more darkish red and black brick you see in the area there. And at every corner, in alternating courses in the rows of bricks, that it had that SS symbol stamped into it, and the military, somebody had a bright idea of going through and plastering it over. So, of course, you had all these white glaring SS plaster things sticking out of the dark brick. So it's just an interesting time to be there. And as a kid, I was dyslexic, and I'd learned to read late in life, and in that reading became rather enthralled with the whole concept of knowledge being transferred by these little squiggles, and so really, really dug into it when we got to Europe. Plus, as I say, the base was not mature yet then, and the dependent population was small, so there weren't that many kids to play with and so on. In any event, the 4th and 5th floor of this building had crates of books that were captured booty from the SS, and included Mayan glyphs in translation, and included Sanskrit in translation, dozens of other languages, Hungarian, Romanian, all of this kind of stuff that the SS had gotten in their occult search division. And I didn't know what I was looking at. As a kid, I went on up there. The library is pretty much open. One day I stumbled into the 4th floor, and I kind of lived there for the next couple of years and read a lot of this stuff. I was rather fascinated with the Sanskrit, and so didn't pay much attention to the much more visually involving Mayan stuff that was there. But all these things were in crates, and you just pop open a crate. They'd all been opened, and they were just lying stacked around and gathering dust in these upper floors of the library. All the American books and stuff in English language were in the lower floors and were less interesting. A lot of this stuff actually had English translations that were done by presumably prisoners against their will, and there were some rather cryptic notes and little obscure blurbs in the translations and transliterations that were pointed little barbs, if you will, at their captors. So it really held my attention as a child, especially, this is immediately after the war, and there was all of the military associations and so on. In any event, one day, maybe it was a couple of years, maybe it was a year or so to 2 years before the Kennedy assassination in the wintertime, about that same time of year, so about November, I went on up to the 4th floor shocked to discover that the whole place was filled with military personnel, GIs, in their winter clothing, banging all these crates together, shoving all the books into them, and putting them all together and organizing them all. And there were all these people in black robes that I didn't know what this was. In military bases, you have to understand that while they were very eclectic and treated any religion equally, there was no real religious pressure or visibility in the days of the 50s and 60s in military bases, because they wanted everybody to get along and they didn't want anything that could cause strife. And I had never, in my experience, ever lived in any of the East Coast bases where I would have had any contact with the more ornate arm of the Catholic Church. So I was unfamiliar with Jesuits. That was the first time I'd ever seen them. So here were all these Jesuit guys out instructing the GIs how to do this. That got my curiosity, because who should these black-robed people be to give the GIs orders? And then out on the street in the back, I discovered by looking through the third floor window when I'm snooping around trying to figure out what's going on with what I thought of as my books, because I was the only one that ever gotten in there other than my brother, insofar as I knew. And I'd had pretty much the run of the place for a year. Anyway, so I was very possessive about it, and I was checking out, see what was going on, and I looked out the back door, and here are all these deuce and a half trucks, the big army trucks, and a bunch of GIs putting all the crates in the back. There was a couple of military cars, there was a couple of motorcycles, and then there were these cars that I didn't recognize with these symbols I didn't recognize, very ornate crowns and stuff. And there was this tall, sort of thinnish fellow, not all that tall, but medium height, thin fellow that was obviously the head of the Jesuits there. Then there was this sort of plumpish, shorter guy, very bad complexion and snarly, nasty-looking little face that had this strange little hat on I didn't recognize, and these really rich-looking robes, and everybody's running around kissing his ring, including majors and captains that are telling all the GIs what to do. And I'd never seen such behavior before. Never seen a man kiss another man's ring or any of that, because I wasn't Catholic, had no exposure to this. And so it was rather a shock. In any event, they bundled it all up and packed it off. And later on, when I asked about it, I was told that I shouldn't, for one. They wanted to know what I was doing in there, and I just denied ever being in there, just had told them I'd seen the commotion and wondered what was going on. And they told me, well, it was a bunch of books being taken back to the Vatican.
Huh.
So I know from a first-hand situation that there were tons of books that the SS had accumulated in the occult realm, just because I read a lot of them, that are now stored somewhere in the Vatican.
Well, and this next question deals exactly with what you recounted, I believe. You suggest a targeted interest, or an interest in targeting people of the Gnostic truths and knowledge. He says, not unlike yourself, Mr. Aikido, is this a repeat of when the Knights Templar were sent to kill the Gnostics and return the sacred knowledge to the Vatican via the Pope's command, and then, in turn, were then eradicated in fear of potentially blackmailing the Pope?
I don't know about that. It may have just been a power struggle. The Templars had gotten really good at finance, had created the world's first central bank, and were gaining much more power than the church wanted to have out in anybody's hands economically. So that's personally why I think they did them in at that particular time. In the rest of it, I do believe that is the case. There will be targeted, if you will, attacks and so on against people. I wouldn't really suspect myself to be in that group, just because I don't think I'm that big of an annoyance, and maybe much more of an annoyance if I get irritated.
Right. Moving on, Cliff, you mentioned that some quote-unquote high-profile Archaeology Council controllers will be killed or eliminated. This is a three-pronged question. A, might you be referring to Hassan, who is the curator of Egyptian antiquities, but has probably been the most significant wall in the advancement of uncovering of the true significance to the Egyptian pyramid complex?
I could. Maybe. Yeah, I might.
And B, does your data suggest that major disclosures or uncovering of the truth behind the advanced knowledge of our ancestors in the regions of the Nile, the Yucatan Peninsula, South America, Central, North America, and frankly all over the world are finally going to be released?
Yes, and I see that coming out as a result of a confluence of events, probably around, let's say, September through November of next year, of 2010. The visibility rises dramatically during that period of time.
And C, Do the data suggest any correlation to the fall of the Vatican and the exposure of the secrets kept within the Vatican library as being a harbinger to this information coming out?
No, actually, they're not on the building part of the wave. That's after the wave crests. So the onrush of that information is immaterial to what will come out from the Vatican, and the Vatican stuff, while inflammatory at various different levels, will only be confirmatory at the level that we're speaking.
And this person says, Clif, this interpretation from your recent Alta report is extremely powerful. Quote, it needs to be remembered that 2010 will bring crushing poverty to most of the populace of the planet as the United States dollar and the economic structure of the United States goes into failure. The combination of their propaganda and the false flag attacks and the shocking crushing poverty will be used as manipulative tools by the powers that be to incite global war. A, can you give us a probability value on this very encompassing statement as to what 2010 will bring to the entire world?
100% probability. The only variable would be when any given individual would actually begin to experience it. Because see, some people are already living in that crushing poverty and are experiencing hyperinflation in food now, and it will just get beyond the third world and start creeping into where the what we'll call the developed world will at least have some visibility of it. You'll see a lot more of it and feel it on a personal level. Probably by the end of 2010, I would say you should reevaluate that statement then and see if indeed you have not been affected by it.
B, do you see this correlated with any other predictive texts or individuals, even if you reach back into prophecies, sacred texts, or current web blogs?
Yeah, I see it cross-connected all over, and that's what really freaks me out. I mean, if I was just some lunatic out here babbling away on my own and there was no supporting manifestation in reality, even if that reality is on the woo-woo side, then it'd be a lot easier to dismiss, and I wouldn't put it out, right? But the fact that it's correlated and we have these strange links between specific dates we have and weird astrology or astronomical things, full moons and that kind of thing, really does give me pause, but it actually reinforces a view of universe where if there is validity to a component of woo-woo in the world in a general sense, then there must be validity to other components simply because the unorganized universe would support it that way.
And C, towards the end of the Alta report, war is a main topic. Is there any probabilistic data that would suggest any nuclear event that may transpire?
We have probability factors that, but they're more of a threshold kind. So it's not like, say, we could say it's 8% or 19% or something along those lines. Rather, we would say if certain temporal markers are breached and we reach to that point in the descriptors, then we're approaching a point at which there would be a threshold, if you will, a Cuban Missile Crisis kind of point of denouement, beyond which I would not care to speculate. In other words, as we pointed out before, if we were running this before the Cuban Missile Crisis occurred, in our data sets, we wouldn't have been able to predict what the outcome of the Cuban Missile Crisis would have been. We would not have been able, I don't believe, given that if the internet were running and everybody was thrashing around about the Cuban Missile Crisis as it was occurring, I don't know that our algorithms would have predicted the step down.
You mentioned a drive-by shooting, a quote-unquote drive-by shooting, as being the most likely way in which the visibility about the off-planet military bases would emerge. A, might this be some of the non-NASA probes sent by the Chinese and Indian governments, potentially used to blackmail the Anglican powers that be in revelation of what is really on the moon?
Yes, that's probably the most probable, and certain temporal indicators in early January would maybe confirm that.
Your data suggests Greece and Turkey being something of a center for another form of contact scenario. You mentioned this individual is also a pain in the ass powers that be person. Would you be suggesting a certain guest of the Veritas Show who happens to live in Greece and appears to be said pain in the ass due to the extremely significant, statistically speaking, occurrence of mid-interview call disconnects on a radio show regarding disclosure?
It wouldn't surprise me that universe manifests that way.
Wow. Then I'm privileged to say that there may be a little bit of a correlation there with Veritas, folks.
And we should also note, of course, that the more of a pain you are, the more you need to be aware of the karyos.
Yes. Please define the word karyos, by the way.
That's the quality of time, not the quantity of time. most people are familiar with time as we slice and dice it in the second, millisecond, and so on.
Yes.
But there's actually a feeling, an emotional response, a receptor. As the antenna vibrates, it knows the quality of that particular time. So as a martial artist, you, for instance, work for years to tune that ability to sense the quality of timing in doing your various martial arts things, or a ballerina, or anybody who does physical stuff. So it's very apparent to me that quality exists, and a lot of people miss it because they don't do that kind of art. Nonetheless, almost everybody feels it at some point, where they just tingle all over and they think, holy cow, and then they do something and boy, it sure works out fine.
You seem to suggest that the powers that be will attempt to use the multiple sightings and ET contact scenarios as an opportunity to implement their ET invasion tactic, but that their power base may be sufficiently diminished that time to have any real effect. Does your data suggest this will be because of the personal nature of ET contact, or because of public sightings and public events?
More the latter. The data seems to suggest it'll be more of a big propaganda failure, I think, probably because of enough people will be aware and they'll just sort of laugh it off, so to speak.
Thinking about 8808, did your web bots pick up the anomalous fear associated with the Beijing opening ceremonies, the Olympics?
Yes. We also picked up a whole lot of other minor stuff that indicated it wouldn't be as significant as the previous Olympics in Greece.
Okay.
Where we had the same level of fear associated with terrorism and so on, but there were actually manifestations that showed up in the accidents and other things that occurred then.
What is the latest language in relation to the ETs, and does the predictive language indicate that we'll be having more sightings, whistleblowers, etc.?
Yes, indeed. We're still waiting for... I'd actually sort of screwed up here, okay? Because I thought for sure on a personal level, on my monkey mind, or maybe it was just because I wanted it, I don't know. This is the real problem with doing interpretation. And you have to get yourself out of the loop, so to speak. But I really had thought that the whistleblower that would bring everything down to its knees would be related to the ETs and the cover-up there, as opposed to the climate gate. I see now where I was wrong, and I can go back and tweak the data. But I'd actually sort of anticipated that there would be this big component there simply because of the way that data sets had built up in the Space Goat Farts entity and some other entities in the crosslinks. A lot of that language remains unfulfilled. So there may yet be something that's somehow curiously or screwily associated with the climate gate problem that does bring out yet more whistleblowers on the ET stuff. However, let me also back up and state that the Andrew Basiago's report, again, going forward, from that period of time, there is this very steady, gradual accumulation of data that shows that eventually it's going to get to, by eventually, I mean in 2010, that we'll get to a crescendo or a threshold point, and we'll be at the knee of an exponential curve, and then all hell breaks loose, and it just comes from all quarters. And it's building now, and we're seeing more of it manifest now. So I'm very sure that will occur. Whether there will be this other weird cross-linked ET business to the ClimateGate stuff, I can't say.
And these are some practical questions. I like them. What do you see happening with the economy over the next 6 months, and what economic specifics will affect the lay person on the street in this 6-month timeline?
Food prices, energy prices. Once we reach this point where inflation becomes a little bit more visible, the shortages will start appearing, and then there'll be other cycles relative to shelves being empty, causing further disruption, more anxiety. So basically, it's going to be, the feeling will be an amplified version of the 70s. I don't know if you lived through it, but the hyperinflation that we encountered and so on, it'll be amplified, and it'll be specific. Some areas, like California, may not have a problem with getting fresh vegetables, but other parts of the country, you may find a real scrabble for that. So it's going to be not uniform, not ubiquitous that way, but the level of anxiety and so on will touch everyone. I would say that on a practical level, the suggestion is to get food, get your regular food, buy more of it when you can, because you cannot be assured in the future you'll be able to get those items. So if you can possibly afford one or two more every time you go shopping, that would be the best way to put your money into something that will stand the inflationary test of time for you. And that will be fairly quick. The situation is a lot more dire for those individuals that are living outside of the Anglosphere and trying to survive on $2 a day, that kind of thing. We're going to see huge levels of horrific starvation as a result of the dollar collapse. Bear in mind that there seems to be a mental construct among a lot of people that say because of A, because I cannot conceive of something, it cannot occur. And so then they find a reason that they cannot conceive of something. This is called fear management. And they say, I have a fear because this person tells me there's going to be starvation. Now, okay, I address this fear by saying, oh, no, there cannot be starvation because he's saying the starvation is going to be related to the dollar death. And I say the dollar death cannot occur because, as an instance, 62% of all the wealth is held by on the planet is currently held by dollars, in the form of dollars. And so they basically are creating a mental construct that says, because of this E, D, or F, or G, A, B, and C can't happen. And unfortunately, that's a spurious view of universe. A, B, and C still can happen, whether or not their view is that these other lesser elements can't. And just because 62% of the populace or of the wealth of the planet is held in the dollar doesn't mean the dollar isn't dying. And if you don't see the signs all around you, again, you're simply not paying attention. Just today, we found that the
Middle Eastern countries.
Correct. They've agreed on a unified currency. That's the death knell for the petrodollar. It is now officially dead as of this point.
When I read that, that's exactly what I thought. Because what really keeps us alive is the petrodollar. People, all that money comes back to us and reinvested here. But once you have the Gulf states creating their own euro-like currency to transact among themselves on oil, then what really happens to the dollar aside from dying?
Exactly. I can't conceive of anything happening because the dollar has nothing to back it. They have oil. Russia has, diamonds, oil, gas, and so on. So their currencies are solid. Same thing is true of a lot of the other producing countries. But we've been so eviscerated here, and the whole purpose of our social order for the last 20 years, maybe even longer, has been the production of weird, obscure financial instruments that have been foisted on the rest of the planet. And now we've used those up. What are we going to produce?
Well, let me ask you, Cliff, wouldn't this be a great opportunity to release those alleged secret technologies that would give us some, perhaps not free energy, but alternative energies that may not be requiring the dependence on oil that we have?
I think it would be perfect. It'd be an astounding time where even amnesty would be possible. I would suggest that right now, and I'll get into something that I probably shouldn't, but I would suggest that right now the Kyrios of the time is such that if the black ops people were to wait and say until just at the point where the economy is really being hit hard in this early part of next year, and then they were to come on out and say, we have all of this stuff, but basically you got to forgive us for all the crimes we've committed in getting it to this point, they might actually find a relatively favorable reception, and the world changes from that point forward. Will that occur? I don't know. I mean, the idea that great things can happen absolutely instantly. Good things take a little bit of time. Bad things grow slowly, and so they're easy to predict. That's why my reports really go that route. There is that potential in the nature of the time, and there has in my lifetime been no better point, and I can't perceive of any other future time where we're going to get to the Kyrios that is this rich, where the texture of the time is just so multivariate that they could make this statement and pull it off and save their butts and save our butts, et cetera, et cetera. And that's probably exactly why it won't happen.
And the same applies to disclosure, too. Give amnesty to those people who... No?
Disclosure is a different issue. Disclosure itself involves a problem where the officials will never, ever, ever, ever admit it, because then they have to atone for crimes committed by their predecessors. And, politicians just don't have the strength of will nor the intestinal fortitude. And so they'll never accept the fact that they would have to pay, for instance, for the William Coopers and so on who've been killed by the secrecy people all over all these years. You need to read in a serious way. Everybody needs to study Mr. Dolan's work, UFOs and the
National Security State.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then you get the idea of the overwhelming mass of murders and other nefarious activities that have been done in our names for all these years in just this one area. And disclosure would have to be accompanied by atonement. And tell me where there is a politician now with the guts to stand up and do the mea culpa.
None. They have a religion and one religion only, and it's called re-election.
Correct. Cover my ass so I can stay here.
Right.
Yep.
How much does your own perspective, Cliff, influence the interpretation of the data? Would someone with a completely different worldview that had a full understanding of how the process works is likely to draw different conclusions and forecasts?
Certainly. Absolutely. 100%. I mean, my who I am is so we interact with this. I don't see how it could be otherwise. Someone else doing the same kind of work would have an entirely different perspective and would look at all these words and assign different values and so on. So it could not be otherwise that that my personality is extremely laid over it. What I have to do is to try and get my conscious mind out of the loop, get my monkey mind out of the loop so that we can get some accuracy. The worldview I have, I think, is what actually helps in my accuracy is the worldview is not clouded by control structures in the sense I'm not schooled, I'm educated, and there's a huge difference. I have no religion, but I'm extremely spiritual. There's a huge difference. So without those filters, I get a view of the world that is offensive to many, but is also much more accurate than you would get with those filters.
And I really want to ask the remaining questions from the audience. This is their show. This is the 1 year anniversary, and I want to be able to ask them all. Thankfully, the Israeli mistake cloud of death didn't occur. Was there a significant...
has not yet.
Has not yet. Was there a significant shift in the language in this meme? And is the language predicting the possibility of this event still happening?
The latter is correct. The language has not shifted away from it. It is merely not growing as fast, and it is extended out in longer-term values, which may, let's go back to our previous discussion about whether or not we make a difference. That may be indicating that some people are going, maybe we'd better rethink this, and thus that shifted the time frame, and hopefully may shift that time frame so far out into the future that the probability disappears. But so far, the probability level has not decreased, but the growth factor hasn't increased that probability, and the language shift has still continued to have it out into our future. I would say that if we don't see it by May, we probably won't. But the peak of the values are also within the frothy chaos of the dollar death by the equinox in March.
Well, this morning, you go to the headlines, and a lot of them you see Iranian missile can reach Tel Aviv or Israel. Isn't that more or less preparation mentally?
Oh, yes. And I have to say that, sorry to interrupt, but I have to say that the language that we're getting currently manifesting in the Farsi community seems to suggest that the hackles on the back of their neck are raised high, and that if I had to put a time frame on it, I would say within the next 45 days.
Do you have any information about Iran's supreme leader who hasn't been seen for a while? Some people speculate that he died.
It's in the disappearance category.
Right.
So we do have some data in that. I don't want to say anything about it. Sorry.
Okay.
For some reasons, it'll become apparent again by about January 15th.
And that's only a few weeks from now, folks.
Yeah.
If the conclusion drawn by Patrick Garrell are even remotely accurate, then it would seem the precursor Earth change events would manifest in varying degrees over the next few years. Although you have touched
I'm counting on that.
Although you have touched on a few things, could you elaborate on some of the specific events and provide some of sort of loose timeline associated with them?
I would expect that if we're okay, let's look at it this way. This is a spring kind of an issue. And if you've ever messed about with springs and watches, you know that when you get down to the very last few windings, the amount of tension you have to put in gets tighter.
Yes.
And so if we just think about time that way, then we'll see a whole lot more events clustered around the December 2012 and lessening events as you draw further away from that time on either side of it. Okay, so the events would lessen in 2013 just as they would be less in 2011. So taking that into mind, so that we have certain temporal markers. I expect some fairly big precursors. One thing I'm really expecting is a crack in the Pacific plate, the same way the Indo-Australian plate cracked in half. I expect the Pacific plate to have a major crack. This event, I think, will take place before mid-2011 and is probably most likely between July 2010 and July 2011, although there's no real reason it couldn't occur now. The level of probability increases as the magnetic squeeze continues. So there are certain things that are certainly predictable. Beyond the, let's just say, laughable climate warming kind of thing, we can predict banding in the weather, such that we might see a situation where the Arctic and the Antarctic are warm, and the bands immediately below them are extremely cold, and then bands of warm, and so on, at a latitudinal basis. We also should see at the same time more volcanism in antipodal positions. In other words, actually on trines and 180 degrees. So 120 degrees and 180 degrees in a rough sense. So in other words, if you had volcanoes in Russia, I would expect volcanoes shortly thereafter or at the same time in Latin America on the Pacific coast. I would at the same time also expect volcanoes to get a little bit rumbly in the Caribbean, or excuse me, in the Mediterranean and in northern Africa, so that we have these things simultaneous. We should find that a lot of these things are actually on those hyperdimensional points that we talked about. So, for instance, if you're not particularly located on one of them, you should be, other than weather, you shouldn't be experiencing some of the other effects until later on in the future. The big squeeze is also going to have predictable effects on humans. And so we should see a lot more wacky behavior from humans en masse and as individuals. And the individuals might express this in the form of, random muckings where they just go out and beat people up or kill them or whatever, as well as a long festering relationship issues just exploding out of nowhere, and a lot of interpersonal killings, siblings on siblings, that kind of thing, just unexpectedly, or rather, we're just not prepared for the level at which it will rise to it. We may even see a lot of people experiencing things like out-of-body experiences in a semi-conscious state. Driving to work, all of a sudden they may find themselves launched out of their body for a few seconds or more as the squeeze effect gets them as they move and transit across these hyperdimensional points. So we're going to see really strange stuff like that. On the other hand, we're sure to see the extreme cold. I suspect that the diaspora, the breaking of the gas lines, and all that kind of stuff will probably hit us in this next week or so, and may be focused with the leading edge of a sort of cone, may be focused on Britain and widen out to include some of the Scandinavian and Northern European countries. And then it may be followed by extreme warming, very sudden shock, or it may be that. And then there's other language that suggests some other parts of the planet in the North America may have a cold that settles in that won't be really dissipating until perhaps even April or May, several months after it should have gone. And abrupt changes, a lot of these things will be before the equinox. After that, the weather seems to get a little bit chaotic, frothy, where many of the long-term patterns break up. We have spiraling or indications for looping, if you will, jet stream connections. In other words, a jet stream might split and form a little loop that just seems to go off on its own, very much like the red spot, as the question was brought up earlier. Those should probably be in abnormal spots, though, just very much like the sunspots. That's another issue. If we look at the sun, some of the precursors we ought to see is a chaotic environment of sudden sunspots that erupt in non-traditional latitudes. In other words, not around 19.47.
Right, 19.47 specifically. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, and may even go to the equator or to the polar region. And when you see the sunspots in the polar region, that's when you know we're going to be really screwed, because that's like probably an immediate precursor of some period of time. Immediate might be 18 months, but it also might be 1 month. We just have no way of knowing because our historical data is so skewed by what the powers that be have held from us. But there will be precursors, and I'm pretty sure there are guys within the military, probably within the sound of my voice, so to speak, that know specifically that when this happens, we have 18 days or 20 days or whatever, because the sunspot cycle is very, very accurately calculated by the Mayans into the 1,000th decimal point, and I'm sure they're using those calendars.
And this is the last part of that Gerl question. In your opinion, is it scientifically possible that Gerl's roughly 11,500 year cycle of pole shifts is a process that is relatively new on a cosmic level? He says, I'm having difficulty reconciling the frequency of the events with the dinosaur fossil records. It would appear that a very high percentage die-off of fauna every 10 to 12,000 years would be more overtly reflected in this strata. If the time span between shift occurrences in the far distant past were more extended, it could explain why most dinosaur species live for millions of years before becoming extinct.
Okay, but another thing that could also explain that is that we've got carbon-14 all wrong. Most of what we use as a basis for saying that these critters died then is the reading of carbon-14 or other decaying isotopes.
Yes.
What if every 11 or 12,000 years the whole ratio of carbon-14 to all the other carbon atoms gets just gone bluey because of these expulsive episodes from the sun?
A reset.
Exactly, it's a reset button. And then we would then take our data It's the same analogy as this for those people that don't understand carbon dating. Let's look at it as ice cores. If we go to the pole and we see this huge mountain of ice and it's 2 miles thick and we drill down through it and we see these little layers forming in there and we say, geez, we think this ice has been here 10 million years, therefore each millimeter equals X number of years, we're making a certain assumption based on that initial assumption that we think that ice has been there for 10 million years. What if it's only been there 11,000 years and it occurred mostly in the first year of that 11,000 years? Then all of our assumptions are totally thrown out the window. And so all of our assumptions on dating and everything relative to the fossil record, if they're based on any of these carbon-14 things, may be thrown out the window simply because it is now becoming known that these outbursts do alter the carbon-14 and other atomic ratios between atoms significantly. And therefore, if you're going to base anything on carbon-14, you have to base it on the assumption that that carbon-14 reading is only valid in this cycle of 11,000 or something slightly less than 12,000 years. And you cannot extend it beyond that cycle because you cannot be guaranteed that that ratio existed before then.
You may like it. Absolutely does. You may like or may not like this question, but I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say. I heard from an acute listener that you, out of the free fruition of your own mouth, in your own words, said, I have photos of multiple tetrahedron pyramids, one of which is twice as big as the Great Pyramids, clearly showing an arch entrance opening approximately 90 feet by 40 feet. Can you tell us more about this?
These were gifted to me. There are certain conditions that I can release them. Those conditions don't exist yet. If they ever do, probably my releasing them will be meaningless because I merely have copies. I'm more of a storehouse, if you will, than a primary source. And what I said is true.
Why do you believe that this information is not out in the mainstream?
Because it's a control issue. They control us through information. They want to have a specific view of the world built up. I mean, let me be really clear about this. If you read through history and you go back and you read about this fellow by the name of John Dee, the original 007, who was the original master, if you will, of how do I want to say this, of the powers that be's intelligence structure as exhibited through the matriarchy of the Queen of England and that whole family, crime family. That's what they are. They're a crime family. You can take it as true that behind every great fortune, there is a crime that starts it off. And so the crime families hired this fellow by the name of John Dee. He was in what we'll think of as the benighted era of the Middle Ages. This guy did some researching around. He was quite talented. He came up with this idea that just as there are microbes, there are macrobes. There are creatures so large we can't see them. Just as you can look at the ground beneath your feet but not see the earth, there are these creatures that are so large in the universe that they see us but we can't see them, but they were contacting him, sort of channeling, right? Now, we'll set aside the validity of channeling and just say that everybody took this guy, John Dee, seriously. And he said to everybody that he was involved with, all these secret society guys, and they said, look, the macrobes are willing to make a pact with us. And the pact is as follows. If we'll do all of these things and sacrifice souls to them in this particular manner by doing all this stuff out front and inviting the souls to participate, the macrobes will give us great power and we shall rule forever. And by the way, that'll take us all the way up to the end of time and we'll be good to go thereafter. And that is basically the control structure that we all live in. In order for us to buy into the structure, in order for someone to accept the symbols that are placed on them as they join the United States military, they have to have, in any branch, they have to have a view of this military structure as being good. They have to be totally ignorant of the fact that the U.S. military has attacked 200 separate countries in the last 200 years, basically, unprovoked, and is in fact nothing more than a tool of the powers that be. I say this in full knowledge and having been an Army brat and been part of that organization and having an intense love for all the people that commit themselves to that service, they are misguided. And many people within that organization will realize the truth of what I'm saying, that they are not there at that particular patriotic level, and all this is being manipulated. So that's really what it is. It's a power issue. If you let one thing out, the whole edifice starts to crumble. As it crumbles, it reveals the hidden face of what's behind. And they're very desperately afraid of that.
And as I always say, government censorship is there to protect us from reality.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say that. I would phrase it another way. Government censorship is there to ensure their power over us. They need slaves. They don't need awake and aware citizens.
Exactly. Now, this person, are there one or more events showing in future Alta data of the magnitude of the October 7th, 2008 bank failure event?
Yes, and we'll be running right into those as we cross through these first 3 months of 2010, and then there will be another flurry of those kind of things in June.
And I'll be quick on the questions. Is there any given time period event in past world history that compares with near-future Alta predicted events in scope and magnitude?
The only thing I can think of is what occurred 11,802 years ago. That now lingers in our historical record as the original trauma, the Great Flood, all of that. We are truly at epic times. So no, fall of Rome, it's nothing. It's a precursor to what we're going to be going through.
Does Alta data predict foreign manufacturers like China, Mexico, etc., will cease all shipments of raw material and manufactured goods into the United States of America to you, the interpreter of the Alta data? Does this mean all shoes, clothing, imported food, all goods will stop forever?
Not forever. It means an alteration of our existing structure. Without the dollar as the lubricant, none of that machinery works.
When, on a future timeline, will U.S. dollar, Federal Reserve notes, become useless to hold and possess? It would seem early on that useful or barred at our wall items would have more working value than entering into that time of scarce goods on retail shelves with quantities of paper dollars in one's possession.
And that's quite true. That's the Argentine experience, that having goods made a lot more sense than having any form of currency, especially during the early days, early weeks of the crisis. How soon is going to be anybody's guess, but we think the next 3 months, or the first 3 months of 2010 were going to be really rough and may actually be the denouement, if you will, of the dollar itself.
And that's why when people tell me, buy gold, I tell them, what is going to be gold if I can't buy, if I don't have food?
Yeah, buy food, and then if you got anything left over and you got enough food, then you can buy gold. But even so, I would buy silver first, because gold might... we have some weird history that people just don't pay attention to. There were counties in the what we think of the breadbasket of the United States in the 1930s that the whole county could not provide change for a $5 bill. They lived and existed on script. So a single ounce of gold under those circumstances would have bankrolled that county, and you would have been the king, but you couldn't have done any transactions with it. Make sense?
It does. And speaking of gold, you've heard about Fort Knox supposedly having tungsten, or gold-plated tungsten. Have you heard that?
Sure. And I don't know about the supposed part. I know that there's enough substance behind the rumor that there's a lot of Chinese out there with drills at the moment. Actually, truly. I know people that have told me this that are in China that said, hey, by the way, so-and-so is over there drilling all these bars.
And what have they found?
I haven't heard. No one will say that to me. I just.
Does the Alta suggest there will come another time for Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine, Lucet, to establish another precedent for addressing criminal justice in high government?
Yes. The issue is, though, whether it will actually devolve into something like the French Revolution. And that seems to be what the data would suggest. Now, we know that the French Revolution, to a certain extent, was fomented by British agents, again, a direct lineage to this John Dee fellow and his macrobe thing, which is quite the fascinating story if you ever get into it. But in any event, I suspect that the revolution that we're going to have up here will not be Masonically controlled the way that previous one was. And I would advise people that are within the Masons, which is to say the first 3 degrees where they're basically fodder for the latter degrees, to be very careful of their associations. Secret societies are going to have a very, very, very bad reputation, and many people will suffer just because of an innocent association with what they thought was a local do-good society. But I kid you not, the whole secret label is just going to have such a foul taste in our mouths that people will not, actually our data suggests this, that in the height of the ferment and the revolution, people will not dare show or publicly display Masonic symbols.
Does Alta data suggest the world monetary collapse is man-made?
Well, all money is man-made, so yes, that is the case. I actually think, and I'm probably in the minority because everybody in the woo-woo community seems to think that this was all engineered, to happen at this point. I actually believe or think I'm of the opinion that the dollar was going to die anyway, and they worked mightily, hugely to extend it this far, and that probably should have died off in Nixon's time, except for the huge amount of work they put into propping it up just to keep it going this far. And it's an issue of all currencies die within 70 or 80 years. We're the longest currency that's ever existed. Most currency have died between 58 years and 72 years. So sort of in a sense, that's a natural progression. But since it's man-made, yes, the currencies don't exist in nature. They don't grow on trees. So yes, in this sense, it truly is man-made at all levels. And I actually think that it's not really that they chose a healthy economy and decided to put a stake through its heart. I think it's been an unhealthy economy that they've been propping up so long just to get it to this point. The net effect is the same, but a different mechanism.
You're talking about the Bretton Woods Accord,
correct?
Right?
Correct.
Okay.
The whole getting off the gold and then all the work behind the scenes just to keep it floated up.
Does the ALTA suggest Russian scalar weather control over North America?
No. We have a particular view of Russia that is actually very favorable. Doesn't show the Russians as being particularly aggressive in transcontinental kind of stuff. Yeah. It's actually more of a situation where the strata, let me put it this way, in the past, the powers that be cleaved the world based on geopolitical lines. You know, if you lived across that border, you were a bad guy, and if you lived over here, you were okay. Mm-hmm. In the future, that powers that be are going to be diminished, and so we will all see the world in a different level of strata based on where you have been assigned in your caste by the powers that be. So one day you'll wake up and you'll find that, oh, geez, I was assigned a caste level of a cube farm employee. Now cube farms don't exist, so I'll go out and I'll look at the world, and I'll see that I've got a whole lot more in common with that cube farm employee in Mexico or India than I do with the people that used to lord it over me. Right. So my cube farm employee friends and I will all form a strata at that level, and we'll start kicking the bosses, that kind of a deal.
Does ALTA data point to links with 4.5, 27, or $47 trillion of Ambassador Leo Wanta?
No. We don't have enough data to suggest that any of that stuff is real. The level of naivete expressed in the language, it's like a non-starter. There's all these various different language sets out there that especially come from within the woo-woo world, where the underlying premise sounds okay when expressed in legal language, but there is no functional mechanism by where such a thing could exist. An example would be those Wanta funds, if they were, quote, extracted from the economy to be given back to the Americans, what are they extracted from? What part of the global economy collapses in order to have that occur? And so if they were invested in anything over all these years, then they're so inextricably a part of the economy they cannot be extracted, et cetera, et cetera. None of it makes any sense. So those are all in the far edge of the fringe woo-woo. We don't know why it's there. It's unknown, but it certainly isn't real.
Therefore, you think Nassara is a hoax too?
Correct.
Okay. Does ALTA data mention or point to Tesla scalar weapon applications?
Yes, all over to hell and gone, quite honestly, within the space goat farts, and we'll all be, anybody in the 2017 period of time will be experiencing and dealing with this stuff frequently.
Do you think that what we experience in Norway could be part
certainly.
of the scale?
Yeah, exactly. That's very much what I think of as a Dirac-C weapon. It's projected. It's an energetic thing. Anytime you're dealing with energy, you're basically dealing with the hyperdimension or scalar. I prefer actually hyperdimensional because it's much more concise and points to what's going on. The scalar stuff only exists within this side of the dimension.
Will the U.S. regain a working monetary system at a future time?
I don't know. We don't have any data to suggest that.
Will the world enter into a working electronic debit monetary system? The United States?
We don't have any data to suggest that. Things get so chaotic that beyond 2000 this time in 2010, the idea of a globally functioning electronic debit system is anybody's guess as to whether it would exist. Probabilities are fairly low, below 50%.
This one from Australia. Is gold going to reach the $3,000 mark in 2010?
It's a question of what are you, 3,000 what? Dollars, Australian dollars, or whatever? That is the meaningless part of that equation. At some point, gold might well be $60,000 an ounce. We actually have data that suggests it'll be 3 times whatever the Dow is at the time that the Dow is in its most distressing state due to the hyperinflation. And thereafter, any number assignment is purely monkey mind speculation and what someone is willing to sell that gold for. So in other words, we may find conditions in 2010 so dire that in, Calaveras County, California, someone sells an ounce of gold for $100,000. Is it meaningful to anybody in Australia? I think not.
Are solar flares a major issue next year in 2010?
Yes, periodically, and maybe even in this year.
Will the USA increase its naval resources for this China Sea threat in 2010?
We don't see that, no. The United States is going to hit a real bump economically that's going to cause our government to coagulate or contract. Many parts of the government must be severed in a desperate attempt for the governmental core to protect the livelihood of the politicians and the Congress critters, also known as rats. The rats there are going to do everything they can, including things like sacrificing women, infant, children, as they've indicated in their way in which they start slicing and dicing the money as it comes in. So it should work this way. Our projection is that they'll do everything they can to protect the core of those things that give them power. So they'll do everything they can as long as they can, to protect the lobbyists and the interests they represent. They'll do everything they can to protect the Congress, the rats, and the politicians, the minions, as well as the military that keep them in power. But there won't be the ability to expand anything, because they'll still be dealing with the vampirism of the black ops world, trying to suck out every dollar they can during this last period of time. Thus, all of the social programs will be severed during that period of time. It would be impossible for them to justify the expansion of any military effort.
And this is another practical question. What can poor, innocent people do to prepare themselves, since they cannot afford to move away or buy things?
Knowledge. Knowledge is key. Learn things, learn to recognize edible plants. That gets you out of the food issue. Learn to take care of food. Learn to provide value to universe, and universe shall reward you. It's quite true. In my experience, in my experiment C here, which is basically my life from a certain point in awareness, in my experiment C, when I put out value, I get response back from the universe, and it's all harmonious. And by putting out value, I have to say, what can I do that benefits people? Whether or not it benefits me is absolutely immaterial, because if it benefits someone else, then it'll come back to me, and I just don't worry about it. And so the more knowledge I gain, the more benefits I can provide to the more people. Make sense?
It does. This is a woo-woo question. What do you know about clones? And do you think that our leaders could be clones?
Wouldn't matter to me. They're still rats and bozos. I doubt that. I mean, there's a huge amount of calories involved. It takes 180,000 calories for a human female to gestate go to full term. Think of the calories required to grow a clone in a vat or something, and then all of the other education issues and so on. Yeah, the technology is probably existent in universe, and maybe even on this planet for all I know, but just the calorie allocation to duplicate a politician? I don't think so. What's the point? If you're going to want to control the politician, there are a lot easier ways, as they demonstrate all the time.
They're puppets of the same puppeteer, so you don't even need a clone, right?
Yeah, you don't even need to bother with them. They'll do what you say. Somebody's got their hand up the butt of every politician and is pulling all their strings, making their mouth move as they decide it should be done. The famous quote of Bill Clinton when he gets into office, "Geez, I thought I'd have more power."
Right. Why, in your opinion, were some researchers or speakers eliminated while others are still allowed to publicly speak out? And I can think of one who was terminated back in November of 2001, and another one who keeps talking.
Well, there you go. Most of the people that, there's an old saying in the military, those who say don't know, those who know don't say. And that is really true. And those who are in the latter category, who really truly do know, they need to only say a few words, and it's basically a death sentence, because once again, any crack in this control structure is a crack in all of the control structure, and the powers that be recognize this. The minute, for instance, everybody recognizes that the symbols and patches that they wear within the military, in fact, have weird, strange, satanic worship, and I hate to use that reference, connections all the way back to D and the 007 and all of that business. And in fact, those patches are there due to this weird pact they made with the macrobes. Then you're going to start thinking, do I really want to put that patch over my flesh? Do I really want to offer my flesh up in these people's weird satanic cult crap? And then they start questioning everything. And you just can't have that if you're a control structure.
Lucifer question, what do you know about the Luciferian agenda? And do you think most of the leaders worship Lucifer?
I do. It's a sad thing to say because I'm not religious, and I would prefer a rational viewpoint of the world that would have our species behave differently. But I indeed do. I think these rats are warped. Their perspective of the planet is really screwy and something I can't fathom. And there's every evidence in all over to Hell and Gone of everything from Il Cornuto, the hand gestures, all the way up to the attendance of these ritual child sacrifices, which may not be all that ritual for all I know, in the weird owl worship and the owls and symbols all over. Symbols are extremely powerful. This deal with the macrobes extends all the way down to the dollar bill. So it will be a good thing when the dollar bill dies because of the numbers of symbols that are impressed on that dollar bill and that you handle and you agree to and you become part of every time you deal with the dollar itself, which, by the way, they kind of screwed themselves, and they're now realizing that when they went digital, because it was impossible for them to encode directly the symbols and get the same level of energy out of the digital stuff that they got of people actually touching the paper, which gets us into the whole woo-woo world of how much energy you impart on things and what you really are. But if you take anything on that I say as an article of I actually think this is true, and so you can also think it's true, then what I'm telling you is that the level of energy that was imparted in the dollar bill is not done in the symbols of the digital world, and that's why they go to such great lengths in all of the literature that they send you from all of these digital things that you do business with to encode those symbols there. And so they shifted them back one layer, and it was actually rather a shock to them to discover that their power started to fade. It's a weird, strange universe out there, and these people are truly, as the name Vatican says, the word Vatican means place of the sorcerers, and that is the center of the sorcerers. The epistemology and etymology of all of the words around there are very important things. See where the words come from, see what they really mean, and then you get a different view of the world. Once that crack starts, you start looking at everything else with those cracked lenses, and we end up shattering the illusions that are out there. Again, they just can't have this.
You're spiritual. What is your perspective on the spiritual connection regarding everything that is happening on this planet?
Well, it's all part and parcel. There is no two separate earthquakes. To claim otherwise is absurd. My viewpoint is not New Age. It's like ancient in the sense of goes back to the Taoist masters, the yogis, the Aikidoists, and so on. The Aikido thing is like Morihei Ueshiba. He was an enlightened individual. The things that he give us, if there is any reason for me to survive the coming problems of these next few years, it is so that I can help transmit Aikido through into the future, because it's a truly valuable thing to have. And as a spiritual entity, I recognize that as a vibration, the interconnectedness of all energy in the whole universe is an obvious sort of a thing. You don't even have to state it. And those who go to great lengths to deny it and try and slice and dice into control structures really piss me off. And, I shouldn't, as an enlightened individual, get irritated that way. But as a human, I'm subject to emotions, and I need to take those emotions and use them for the power that they give me. So I take that pissed offness and I direct it at these individuals, not because they're evil, but the acts that they do are non-harmonious to universe.
What do you think? Sorry, go ahead.
Let me deviate back to something. Those poor individuals that were taken out by the powers that be in the past 30 or 40 years relative to the free energy and all the hidden stuff and all of this, to a great degree, the suffering and their elimination has seriously weakened the powers that be because of the pressure that it's put on the way that universe operates. And so to a certain extent, every death that is caused by these guys and attempting to cover the secret up adds a level of energy that has not yet dissipated, and there will be an accounting. Just at an energetic level, those of the people that go out and mess around with the metaphysical can see this kind of stuff building up in what we call the stream, and it's very close to a crescendo. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the unaware humans will take this as an excuse for violence, and so I'm very non-sanguine about the chaos and the froth. I think there will be a lot of damage where there shouldn't be. And we're going to have to be real careful that it's not misdirected.
Well, unfortunately, the innocent bystanders would suffer the consequences of this pressure coming out. I call it the boiling frog syndrome.
Correct. And that's really what has me disturbed. Because if we were smart, if we were able to organize, or not organize, but awaken people in a large enough wave, then we might all stand and direct that energy at those who would attempt to use it to slice and dice and further control us. Remember, they want violence. They want riots. because it's an excuse for them to react.
And to gain more control.
Yes.
What do you think happens to our spirit when we die?
Nothing. I have demonstrable evidence of this. I've communicated and have had people that have died coming back communicate with me. And, they don't communicate via words the way that we understand them in our language control center, but they're nonetheless there. I think some 51% of the United States population is admitted in surveys that they, have communed with the dead at one point or another. Death is a doorway. It is not a finality or any of that. Reincarnation exists simply because it could not be otherwise. The vibrational structure of any individual body is neither here nor there, and the ego identification with the body is one of the most frequent parts or first traps you can get into. If you really want a erudite and definitive discussion of this, you need to read The Science of Yoga. It doesn't matter who wrote it. It's the same book over and over and over again, kept going in perpetuity by these yogis, and it's just republished under a different name every so often.
So you're saying you've had communication with the dead. Do you have to be in a different frequency in order to be able to achieve that communication?
I know that things like psilocybin and meditation simultaneously, subcritical doses of psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and meditation from a master can get you right there instantly. Other ways, people that I personally have experienced it in that time before sleep when people had died and they came and visited me and told me, hey, this is okay, don't sweat, go tell this person that, go tell this person that. And it's like, sure, okay, gotcha. My brother passed and he came and saw me because we were so close. I was awake and it was an awake experience. And he was in the bardo, and when he left the bardo, he came and he talked to me. The bardo is an understanding that is just a word series. It's just a context that's put into it by the Tibetans that says after death, we're going to call this place that you go to the bardo. You could call it limbo or any damn thing you choose, and it's not an issue with me. But it functions in a particular way, and I've had that confirmed by people that have gone there. And that they've left. And so a lot of the stuff that I've been able to research out at the core of the yogic sciences, which is not a religion, needs to be carefully distinguished from that. The spiritual yogic sciences, in fact, we find daily validation of. And so I can go along with those. So death is, that's why it's like, well, at the time, when the time comes, I will be quite happy to sacrifice my life and just shed it because it's just this body. And the energy that I will liberate in doing so should be quite powerful.
Just a couple of questions left. That let me say, I'm sorry to hear about your brother.
Hey, let's be real clear about that. Life is suffering. Anybody telling you anything else is trying to sell you something.
Right.
My brother's suffering was to universe's desire. Why that should be, I wouldn't necessarily know. Could I comment on intelligently? And his passing was as universe should have it. My personal sadness, I accept your condolences for, but not for his passing.
In the last Alta report, you said there was a released language by about July the 15th, 2010. Will Europe be in the same situation as the United States?
Yes. Anything close to the Anglosphere, the further away from the Anglosphere, the closer to Russia, the better off you'll be.
So China and Russia are not immune, but isolated.
Yeah, they're much more stable
Yes.
And need to be viewed to a certain degree in a certain amount of isolation because they'll have cores or centers of stability that won't exist in the Anglosphere.
As a
lot of pent-up rage, you see, and that'll bust out all those emotions. That's why I'm afraid of the violence level.
The Chinese are very patient. And as a child, I remember reading a lot about China, and I spent some time in the 90s. And I always said it was the sleeping giant. Do you think it would be the next power?
It is. And we're starting to see that, especially now in the shift of, curiously, of UFO reports. Much more activity there in the last 20 years than in the previous centuries, and much more activity there now than in the U.S., although that may be skewed by the fact that apparently any time a UFO really appears over our area, we start shooting at it.
Right. Well, exactly. Some people ask me, why do you think that Mexico has so many sightings?
And they don't shoot at them.
We don't shoot them down. Exactly.
Right.
Is there any language in the Alta report that seems to say the coming possible disaster in 2010 will be man-made as opposed to natural? Sometimes special dates are means of telling if there are human fingerprints on a disaster. What about the Ides of March 2010?
That's why we're very trepidatious about that period of time, because indeed the powers that be like these weird symbols, they try and get everything done on these symbolic bases because it amplifies their power in the hyperdimensional realm. And so indeed, I'm very trepidatious about that. And yes, indeed, we do show that the powers that be will be out there trying to muck and control the energies. And basically, you can think of it this way: a certain energy existed on September 10th in the year 2001. That energy, had it been left alone and had it expressed, would have totally crashed the financial world and devastated the United States stock market on this September 11th. It did not occur because they used that date as the date of their attack on the money center and changed the energies and redirected it with those sacrificial deaths and so on. So this was a deliberate, effort on their part. They will attempt to do such in the future on these key dates. So yeah, I'd be very, very paranoid. If you're not paranoid, you're simply not paying attention.
Yeah, just like the Yahoo group. Will the Alta reports continue into next year?
We have no plans to stop, but circumstances may prevent that, so I can't say. I mean, I have no plans to not do them, but in the midst of all of this chaos, if the dollar's dying, there's no internet, there's very little ability for me to do so. If the internet's restricted or there's other issues may intrude. And we tried to structure everything so that we could continue if the situation is not quite as bad as we thought, but are prepared to react if it is.
Before we started the show, you told me something very ominous, and tell me if you want me to cut this from the show, and I will. But you asked me for my snail mail address, and then you told me because the internet may not be the way you and I communicate. Do you see that happening?
Yes. It's your call as to whether to put it in there or not. Yeah, there will be disruptions. Whether or not they're permanent or how long lasting, we just can't say. There's a lot of emotional froth, and much of it will express itself in that form. I expect it to slow down, big chunks to fall off for a while, huge impacts as a result of the dollar death.
Is it going to be inflicted by humans, or is it going to be a natural electromagnetic pulse?
No. It's bankruptcies of the companies that are providing the routers, and they go bankrupt. The routers get shut off, and a whole node is gone. That kind of thing. So no. It's
not even DNS circumvention will help here.
Correct. Simply because so much of the economics structure will have rolling power outages in the U.S. because of the price of coal relative to the price of diesel and getting it into the furnaces and so on. So a lot of that will intrude. Is that a natural event? I don't know.
So when you said this at the beginning of the show, actually what you said about you intend to continue the Alta reports, but circumstances may prevent you from doing so, this is the reason why?
Correct.
Okay.
And others that I just won't go into.
All right. Just the last couple of questions. Is the dog poet still someone we should be looking out for, and do you know who it is yet?
I'm not going to anoint anybody because I won't be sure until after the fact when the language actually is able to be run and manifest in such a way, and we have, say, 60 to 80% of the language being hits, then we can say, yeah, it looks to be this person. That we have several candidates, and it's very important that we pay attention to this individual, yes. But we're waiting for a thing we've called the Sirius song, which won't be named that or anything along those lines, and it'll be you'll be able to put that label to it after it's actually appeared, and we'll all know that it's appeared because of how viral it'll get on things like YouTube and how much it'll propel the popular culture. We expect to see that sometime before July.
I heard in the last couple of days that Prince William has been, and I don't know, this just surfaced, Prince William has been given some of the Queen's duties in preparation for being the future king. Do you think he's going to have prominence in the next few years?
I won't go there for various reasons, and I'll state it in a generic fashion. I have nothing against the royals as individuals, as humans. The roles they occupy are an evil upon the planet, and so I have a negative view of the idea of monarchies and so on. There are other hidden structures within the monarchy structure that are apparent to those who look at it. There's going to be a huge amount of impact on the monarchies during the chaos. I could, for instance, say that, all these monarchists are going to have a great deal of prominence, and it'll be, swinging at the end of a rope or, in a show trial or executed by electric, voltage or injection or something. And that may well be true. Of any specific royal, I just don't know because I don't track these people. It creeps me out to even think about them.
Do you ever avoid mentioning stuff that you deem too far out there?
Not too far out, but I will avoid mentioning a lot of stuff where there could be temporal repercussions on individuals. That's why we don't do individuals, even though we have the capability of doing it with our data. If they have a high enough prominence in the public eye, we can get enough data around them in archetypes to be able to make some projections, but we just don't do that because of the karmic repercussions. So there'll be a lot of stuff that I won't say, but doesn't really affect most people. It may actually go towards proving our accuracy, but even at the risk of, I wouldn't do it at the risk. In other words, I wouldn't say something just to say, oh, look how good we were, we got that hit, and look, you couldn't deny that this was, a real accurate forecast. But if it placed someone at risk, I just let it stay around, and not say anything. So we have a tendency to avoid naming people when we know well in advance what may occur.
What is the most outrageous woo-woo stuff you've avoided mentioning?
Relates to the Catholic Church and the Vatican, simply because I don't want to piss people off unnecessarily, and it will all be revealed soon enough anyway.
Right. This is a show about this. Well, disclosure doesn't have to be with ETs, but we call it disclosure, one guest at a time. Is there something that you've always wanted to say, but you have never done so and you'd like to say it today?
Nope. Pretty much I'm a big blabbermouth and a bullshitter, and I just get it out all the time. So no, I don't hang that stuff on.
One of the last couple of questions. This person says, and I think he believes that you're not doing Alta anymore. Lastly, Clif, what the hell are you going to do with yourself now that this is the last Alta report, besides eating copious amounts of pie and re-releasing Igor back into the wild?
What I'm going to do is work on that boat, and then do shows with you potentially in the future where we'll just discuss technical parts of boat design, what's feasible, what can be done, strategies for heavy weather sailing, all of that kind of business. It'll become necessary.
Do you know that Dr. Paul Aviolette and I talked about something that you and I talked about before, about anti-gravity boats?
Oh, you did? I didn't hear that part. I stopped around the 20th interruption, I think, simply because of what was going on here.
And this last person, I would like to know how large a part is Aikido training playing in his preparations? Does the focus on martial arts encourage a person to avoid the fear trap, which can immobilize and thwart survival?
Yes, it does. The latter is quite true, because in Aikido, you must be fearless, because every single time you do anything, even in working with your partner in a practice session, places you at risk. You're doing rolls at high speed. You're being flung 10 and 15 and 20 feet. You must land correctly or you will hurt yourself. Recently, I actually had an instance where in a beginning Aikido class, I just couldn't work with this guy because I was afraid of damaging him because he was not rolling correctly, and I could see that as he rolled, his shoulders and his hips were impacting. So we had to stop and give him instruction on how to roll properly. But within that, you have to be fearless. And fearless is an interesting word. It doesn't mean that you don't have fear. It means you simply don't let the fear dominate everything, and you go ahead anyway. So I'm really afraid of smacking my head into that wall when I roll, but I don't let it stop me from rolling. The martial arts, I think, frames, it's a philosophical structure that allows me to place everything in a particular framework that has been extremely valuable in my life, and I would extend that an invitation to anybody and everybody to certainly go and look at Aikido, see it work, look at some of these martial arts that are, not so external, and see if that framework doesn't help them. It's truly marvelous. And it does. In the midst of terrible circumstances, like I was in a 8.1 earthquake in Mexico City, and everybody around me in this particular restaurant was...
1985?
No. I'm losing sound on you. No, this was 93, I believe. And in the midst of that earthquake in this restaurant, I knew what was going on. The guy who was with me had never been in an earthquake before, and he actually thought he was fainting because he thought it was an internal perception that he was wobbling and not the room. And everybody just kind of froze. And I thought, what the hell, and let out this big kia, and everybody looked at me, and I pointed at the door, and then everybody started running like hell because they were, I think, trapped in that little deer-in-the-headlights fear mode, where I get extremely calm in the extraordinary circumstances like that. I enter into another time zone. I'm trained in doing this in the sense that when you do all these randori, these fighting of multiple people at a time in Aikido, which is truly the most marvelous feeling in the world, you may have 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 people coming at you one after the other as rapidly as they can. And so you shift into a different way of dealing with time. And that same feeling settled over me in that earthquake, and it helped.
Do you remember the date of that earthquake?
Sorry, I don't. Hang on a second. When did I go to Mexico City? What time of the year was that? Oh, she's not around. I'm sorry, I just don't. I've been in Mexico City a couple of times, and both times I was there, I got hit by an earthquake. So I can't.
I was living in Mexico City in September of '93, and there was an earthquake.
That was it. September. Yep. Yes. And also, by the way, we've had an interruption here with the Skype. I'm losing you now. Uh-oh. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to break off. I've got to go as well. Sorry. Thanks.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
And that was Clif High from halfpasthuman.com. One of our favorite guests indeed. I had to re-record my voice for the last few seconds of the show. Not only did we extend the allotted time, but no wonder Clif could not understand me. Could you understand this? That experimentation with electrical free energy devices is a good use of one's free time. Absolutely not. Too bad, as I had promised in the beginning that I wanted Clif to end the show in a positive note and give some closing remarks. However, I'm sure you'd agree there were some positive notes along the way, and one of the lessons learned from one of the questions asked is worth repeating. What can the less fortunate do in order to prepare if they cannot move or buy products? And he said, acquire knowledge. In addition to the local library, we are all doing our part. Thanks to those who continue to donate subscriptions. As you know, Veritas will also donate a subscription every time you donate one. Thank you. And by the way, since Clif did not get to mention his website, I'm sure that all of you know it. Make sure to support his work by visiting halfpasthuman.com. For $10, his latest Alta report includes 58 pages. Or if you are currently active in law enforcement or the military, go to his website. Send him an email with the words Gary McKinnon on the subject and on the body of your message and request a free report. You'll get it for free, and you'll also be helping Gary McKinnon along the way. I want to thank all of you once again for welcoming me on your busy schedules, for your loyalty and support in 2009. You really kept Veritas alive. I know there are many other shows, and I feel honored, humbled, and privileged that you have also chosen Veritas. I wish you and your loved ones a wonderful holiday season wherever you are. Let's look forward together to what the new year will bring. We can all make a difference. And remember to stop by the Manticore Forum and tell me, just like I shared one member's experience, what Veritas has done for you so far. And don't forget, there is a bonus interview this week with Zachariah Sitchin. This interview will not be available to the public, as it's only 30 minutes long. Apparently, Mr. Sitchin has a contractual agreement with his publisher, but he wishes to conduct another interview in the near future. We're just warming up. And I leave you with a quote from yours truly. To those of you who have dreams and are told you are simply a dreamer, don't ever stop dreaming. Veritas was my dream. If you can dream something, you can accomplish anything. And speaking of dreaming, I will also leave you with a song called Forever Dreaming by Eat More Cake. Enjoy. Until next week, be well.